Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome all to the meeting of the Finance Committee of the Board of Directors of the East Bay Regional Park District for September 30, 2020. We will begin our meeting by calling roll. Caitlin, Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll of the committee?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Today we'll be taking roll. Director and Chair Colin Coffey.
Here.
Director Ellen Corbett.
She's muted.
Director Corbett. I believe you're muted.
I am here.
Thank you very much.
It's hard to mute her.
Thank you, Director Corbett. Director D. Rosario.
Here.
Thank you. And members of the Park District staff in this meeting include Assistant General Manager Deborah Ocker, Assistant General Manager Christina Kelchner, and we will read the rest of the staff now, not as a roll call, but just for the record. We have Deborah Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer, Michelle Straussen-O'Hara, Assistant Finance Officer, Connie Swisher, Confidential Secretary, Matthew James, Ren Bates, and then we have Christina Crosby, David Sumner, Jim Tallarico, Kim Belingett, Lisa Gorgian, Meadow Darcy, Naomi Laval, Ruby Tummer, and that is everyone who has joined us so far.
Okay, I have a note that we, and thank you, Caitlin. We have a couple of guests that will be participating in the meeting today. Does Deborah Ocker or Christina want to introduce the two guests present? They might not be here at this point because we're just starting.
Sure. As part of our agenda items, we have co-presenters that will present with us for the PARS pension trust item. We have, I think, Randy will join us and Mitch, and Deborah will introduce them at that time. And also, I believe Abby Fateman will be able to join us on the HCP item. So we'll go ahead and do introductions when those items come up.
Okay, thank you. And what I'll do at this point before we go to agenda item number 1 on Park District Pension Trust matters, I'll ask Deborah Ocker to recite our standard disclaimers and understandings about how we conduct these meetings during the COVID crisis.
Thank you, Director Coffey. Yes, today's Finance Committee meeting is held in accordance with Governor Newsom's executive order, allowing board members to participate remotely. We are providing a live video streaming on the district's YouTube channel, and people are invited to participate in our meeting and provide public comments in 3 different ways. Our agenda states that people can submit an email to our recording secretary, Caitlin Stone. They can leave a voicemail, or they're welcome to join this Zoom meeting and provide the recording secretary their name and what item they're interested in talking on. I think today we do have at least one member of the public that has requested to speak on an agenda item later down the line. And so we'll bring that up. And I think that is all I had to report, unless there's any question from board members about the procedures.
Any questions? Okay, we're good to go. Let's go to agenda item number 1, annual report on Park District Pension Trust. And I believe we're going to kick that to Deborah Spalding. And this is an information item as I understand it. And as of earlier today, we, and as Deborah just mentioned, we don't have any requests for public comments on this. So we'll have the presentation and board questions and then move on to the next item. Thank you. Deborah?
All right. Good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer. And the first agenda item is the annual report on the Park District Pension Trust. I'm going to give a brief overview, and then I'm going to turn it over to our consultants. Mitch Barker is here from PARS with his team, which includes Randall Yurchik from Highmark and Angela Tang, also from PARS. So first, let me give a brief overview of our pension trust. So it was created back in 2017 for two reasons. One is that we were seeing escalating costs in our CalPERS retirement, and we wanted to figure out how to address that. And at the same time, there was a new method for us to fund pension costs using a Section 115 trust. And if I understand correctly, so previously you could only use a Section 115 trust for OPEB, for other post-employment benefits. But starting in 2016, you could use this for pension costs, to do a pension trust. So we started that trust in 2017, and each year we have been putting some funds into this. And by the end of 2020, we will have 8.5 million in the trust. Our plan at this point is to begin drawing down the funds again incrementally beginning in 2022. So we've been slowly building up the funds in the trust. They've been earning interest. And then as our CalPERS rates get to a certain level, we're going to start drawing down on those trust funds. So again, we have staff from PARS and Highmark here to present additional information regarding investment earnings to date and future strategy. But I did want to do one other thing before I turn it over to them, which is that we've received a letter from one of our retirees, Ted Radosevich, who was our previous district counsel. And he sent in the following comments and questions. So I'm going to read these into the record. And Ted wrote, I have a couple questions that I would hope would be explored by staff and by PARS regarding future investment allocations in light of the current economic environment. To be clear, I don't have any specific recommendations or approaches to suggest at this time. 10-year treasury bonds are earning less than 1% a year. The Federal Reserve seems to be saying that short-term interest rates will be near zero for the next few years at least. As the district adds new money to the trust, and as the bond holdings in our portfolio continue to mature and be replaced by much lower earning bonds, the interest earned from our 65% allocation to bonds will fall significantly. Has the district and or PARS considered the need to reallocate our overall investments? And then in light of rapidly lowering returns in the bond market, has PARS developed a current estimate for the rate of return in our portfolio as currently allocated? And I'll just say briefly again, before I turn it over to staff from PARS and Highmark, that we have been thinking about this and we have discussed this with Highmark and PARS staff. And based on the relatively short time horizon for this trust, that we're going to start drawing down on the funds most likely beginning next year, our current thought is that we want to stay with our moderately conservative investment strategy, which is a particular strategy that we opted for back in 2017. And that dictates the asset allocation. So we that 65% allocation to bonds is according to that moderately conservative strategy. However, we have asked Highmark and PARS to discuss this issue with the committee so that they can hear the alternatives and be part of the deliberation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now, and I believe staff from PARS have a presentation they will share. If not, I can pull my slides up also.
Thank you. Well,
Hi,
welcome.
Deb. This is Mitch Barker. Go ahead. Thank you. Thank you, Angela, for putting our presentation up. We appreciate it. Boy, it's beautiful. I'd love to be out hiking out there right now. Members of the Finance Committee, this is Mitch Barker, Executive Vice President with PARS. You've been a longtime client, and we really appreciate your mission. My daughter lives right off of one of the trails, and I hike it frequently. And wish we were there to meet in person, and hopefully in the future that will happen. But we appreciate Zoom calls and the opportunity to get in front of you today. Next. As Deb mentioned, there's 3 of us today, myself, Angela Tang, Client Service Coordinator, and Randy Yurchak with Highmark, who's our Portfolio Manager. Next. And just a reminder for the committee, in case anyone hasn't been in these reviews, there's 3 companies that are actually bringing you this program. We work together as a team. PARS is sort of the quarterback of the group. We try and make sure everything goes smoothly. What we actually do is the record keeping, the accounting, and the plan compliance. We have over 400 agencies in this 115 trust, and we got to keep everybody separate. And also that plan compliance is not easy. We have to monitor the IRS, GASB, and state government code to make sure everything goes smoothly. The trustee is U.S. Bank, highly regarded, very large bank, and they are the custodian of your assets. They hold the money in a walled off trust that's protected. Our investment management partner is Highmark Capital, as mentioned. A couple of key things I'd like to mention about Highmark that I think are very important. One, they provide investment policy assistance. I think that's critical. It has to be a different investment policy than your general fund based on state government code, because Randy and his team are investing in equities, and we need to have guidance on that sort of thing, and it's always good to have that in writing. Another key thing is open architecture platform. They have the ability to choose from 14,000 funds out there, be them mutual funds or index funds, and they do a great job of researching to make sure that they've chosen the best funds for you. So that's our team. Next. Turn it over to Angela now to get into the specific plan details for East Bay Regional Park District.
Thank you, Mitch. So on page 4, we give you a quick summary of the pension account, which opened up back in September of 2017. The co-plan administrators for the plan are the general manager and the chief financial officer. And as Deb mentioned earlier, the current investment strategy chosen is that moderately conservative Highmark strategy, which Randy will touch on in a couple more pages. I also did want to note that the district is in an individual account. So the second half of this page gives you information as of August 31st. The first contribution that we received was back in December of 2017 in the amount of $3.5 million. Since then, we've received additional contributions totaling $4.5 million, giving us the total contribution as of the end of August of $8 million in contribution. So thus far, no disbursements has been taken out of the trust. So we've been able to see in total investment earnings of just under 1.2 million, giving us the total account balance of a little over $9 million, again, as of the end of August. This next page gives you a graphical representation of what the contributions of the contributions coming into the account, and then the build of the assets since the plan has been in place. And again, you'll see at the very bottom right there that $9 million that's currently in the trust as of the end of August. The next 2 pages, we did include some information regarding the pension funded status. And this is information that we pulled from CalPERS's website, as well as the reports that Deb sent over to us. So it does include the most recent reports that CalPERS released. And that was the report that had the valuation date of June of 2019. So as of that report, the liability was at $453.2 million, with assets at $320.2 million, giving us that funded ratio of 70.6%. From the information that we saw in the report, we did see the contribution amount go from about 18.4 million dollars to about $17.6 million in about 6 years' time. With that being said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Randy, and he can touch on the investments for the trust a little bit more.
Thanks, Angela. So if we go ahead and scroll to page 8. So as noted, the investment objective is moderately conservative Highmark plus. And as the prior council noted, this does constitute about 65% bonds. Right now, our allocation's at 66, or as of the end of August, I should say. allocation in stocks is 30%, which is right at the long-term strategic target. I should mention here that we can have allocation lower or higher, depending on how we view the next 9 to 12 months. We term that as a tactical move. But right now we're in line with the longer term targets. The other point that I'd like to make is that this is in an active investment objective. We have two styles, active and passive. So the active style uses mutual funds that are actively managed, seeking to outperform the benchmark, as opposed to our passive using passive ETFs to just reflect the benchmark. So I'll circle back to that in a little bit, and in terms of a distinction in regards to the issue with yields at this point in time. So as far as the plan return goes, since inception from January 18, plan's up 6.1%. So I want to touch upon what we expect for this investment objective over a long period of time. We expect about 5.5% return over a 30-year history for moderately conservative. We have 5 different investment objectives, and we generate return expectations every for the next 30 years for each of these investment objectives. But as things evolve in the marketplace, what we'll do is we'll update those. We'll look at the investment landscape, and every springtime we update those numbers. So I just want to make a couple of quick comments about the environment as context with returns. We'll just look at in just a minute. But as you all know, COVID caused the severe market decline in March. What we say is the Fed and the federal government, the Federal Reserve and the federal government put in place a plan in 10 days, what it took 6 months to do back in 2008. So that's why we've all seen this sharp recovery in the marketplace so quickly. So as we know, it's 2.3 trillion on the fiscal side and upwards of 4 to 5 trillion on the monetary side. So a lot of big numbers there. Go ahead and scroll to the next page. I just want to make a few brief comments on the returns of the plan. So the black letters, left justified line items represent the returns for the different sub-asset classes and asset classes of the plan. So we take the plan in totality, and then we chop it up into these sub-segments and to demonstrate how these segments have performed. The indented amber lettered italicized represents the benchmarks. And so this is of course important because what we're doing is we're investing in funds that are seeking to outperform the benchmarks. So you'll get variation returns in terms of the return of the plan versus the benchmark. So from top to bottom, cash is yielding 0%. I want to make a point here that we recognize what was noted in the question, and we actually made a change a couple weeks, or let's see, it was either last week or the week before, to reduce our cash to 1%, and we actually funded that with our fixed income portfolio. So we're basically, reducing the amount of 0% yielding investments because we agree that over the next 2 to 3 years, possibly more, we'll see 0% yields on our cash. Fixed income up 5.5%. The one distinction here in terms of why it underperformed is that this investment category has more corporate or credit investments than the benchmark. And typically what happens is in troubling economic time periods, credit underperforms. But that when you come out of this time period, you do want to be invested in credit because over longer periods of time, it typically is outperformed. another way to say we're actually comfortable right now being in credit at this time. The other point I want to make, and this is on a big point because it speaks to the return expectation for bonds. What we use is this term called yield to maturity. On our total fixed income portfolio, we're probably at a low 2% yield to maturity. And because we have credit exposure, if you look at the benchmark, that yield to maturity is about 1.2%. So big disparity there. And you're in the appropriate allocation in terms of fixed income because we have a longer term. If we look out further, we see returns on credit outperforming. As far as the fixed equities go, as you can see, the more risky part of the equity or stock world, small cap funds have gotten hit the worst in terms, or the most in terms of the performance year to date. Also, REITs or real estate investment trusts also has underperformed. And to note here, this has been really impacted by, of course, the two things that we're not doing, which is going to malls and going to office buildings. That all being said, given the strong returns, you can see the performance of the plan up 5.5% in this rocky year. On page 10, I wanted to we will always want our full disclosure in terms of what we own in the plan, as well as how much we own of it. As I mentioned, in terms of the fixed income side, you can see those funds. These are actively managed mutual funds with credit exposure, the 66% of the plan that was noted in the question. On the next slide, page 11, what we have here is just trailing year returns for the different investment funds that are in the plan. Just helps in terms of context of how they performed over time, as well as how they performed against the benchmark. And if we go ahead and scroll back to the initial discussion slide, I believe that was 8, excuse me. I want to make a couple quick points about our 12-month changes. We had been a little bit underweight stocks, but we actually increased that to an equal weight as the market had pulled back, given the trepidation ahead of the election. Bonds, they were unchanged, but actually because of the recent change we did, I think I wrote this report after we made that change actually. So we're actually higher on bonds now, and we're very underweight cash. So as far as our outlook goes, a couple things here I want to point out. The first thing is, of course, the COVID-19 uncertainty and the economy getting back to normal. That's going to cause some rockiness, and that has caused some rockiness in terms of expectation of when we reopen. We also have the stimulus uncertainty that feeds into that. That, of course, it also plays into the election. It looks like we have, things are moving forward on that, even though it's still, uncertain at this point in time. The point, though, here is that both sides want some stimulus. So either it's $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion or $2 trillion, we'll get some sort of number there. But as far as the big issue here near term, it's the elections. Presidency and Congress could see turnover there, and that type of movement there could cause gyrations in the market. Ironically, our research providers have expectations for a Trump win costing the market about 4% in terms of negative reaction. And on the Biden win, it would be a +1%. So I really don't know how they come up with those numbers, but that's just food for thought there. So what I wanted to do also then was address this question about yields and returns and the conclusion that was made in regards to staying with the current investment strategy. The first thing is, when we look at, actually, is there any other questions before I jump into that? Okay, great. The first thing I wanted to mention is I mentioned this, a couple times before, is the yields on our investments are at around the low 2% range. It's, while it's low, it's not thankfully as low as the benchmark. And again, that's because of the credit investments. Within the time frame that between now and when you expect to withdraw, the 2 years, even if you do have some ups and downs along the way in terms of recovery, I think that's enough time for these securities to hold their own. In other words, I don't think there will be. We don't think Highmark doesn't think that there's going to be a problem, a credit event problem. And the big thing about this is because of the Fed, they're backing corporate bonds and they're backing the treasury markets, and that will extend probably until you start withdrawing funds. Pretty comfortable earning 2%, a little 2% plus on the bonds. Well, that's not a lot. At least it's something. On the stock side, now certainly it's got to do the heavy lifting. So again, right now we expect back in the springtime we expected 5.5% return, a long-term return expectation for moderately conservative. My guess is that will likely come down when we review those numbers in the springtime. I can't tell you where that might shake out. Hard to say, but I'd call it, possibly we're talking, maybe around the 5% level if I had to really ballpark it, and don't quote me on that one. And that's basically the difference between where we are in terms of the bond portfolio versus where it was in terms of the value in the springtime. So corporate bonds have appreciated since then, and sort of trying to figure out, what a committee would view inflation and actually bond return expectations along that time frame, the longer term time frame. So I wanted to also mention that if the other return expectation for moderate is 6.3% return expectation, but that has 50% stocks, so that likely might come down a little bit, but that would be, if you did decide, or you were considering, you're looking at somewhere around the neighborhood of 6 to 6.3% return for moderate, the step up in investment selection. And I do agree with the conclusion, just given the time frame in terms of when the withdrawals start to occur, as well as where we're sitting with regards to the plan and the return expectations for bonds. I think that it's an appropriate allocation at this time. And then the one last thing is that we have over-earned. We are at 6.1% or so since inception versus the 5.5% expected.
Thanks, Randy. Deb?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is an informational item, and, but we can have some discussion if the board has questions.
Okay, so we're ready for board questions. I see Director Rosario's hand up. Dee?
Hi, thank you. A great report. It feels like we're on solid ground. Shallow, but solid. But anyway, this is actually a question for either of the Deborahs. Initially, you said we were going to start withdrawing in 2022, and then later on you said we're going to start next year. So is it 2022 or 2021? We're going to start withdrawing?
At this point, so we were looking at using this fund for rate stabilization. And so as the PERS rates are going up, we want to draw on the pension trust to keep them a little bit level. And for 2021, the rates did go up slightly, but I think we've decided we're going to wait and draw on the trust in 2022. We're going to absorb these PERS rate increases in our budget for 2021. And then we will have some funds available to smooth rate increases in the future year.
Okay, and what was the rate increase for CalPERS this year or in 2021?
I'm going to let Deb answer. I think we put something in the report.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I think I saw something later.
Where is it? So I think it's about 30%. Right, Deb?
Yeah, so this is just the classic
Right.
rates that I've got listed here. So it went up from 30.1 to 31.7%. So that's the percent of payroll that you pay to CalPERS. So I can't tell you what that percent change is, but and it's if you look at the next 5-year projection, it's going to keep going up, and this does not include the returns. So this year CalPERS did not achieve its investment target. And so we know that that's coming down the pike, and that also played into our thought process of, maybe let's wait another year. I think that we're going to be seeing even higher rates than what was previously projected by CalPERS.
Okay. And so, so it sounds like we're comfortable with paying up to 31.7%. And then after beyond that, we'll try to keep it at that level.
Right. So, and remember, the PERS numbers are fiscal year.
Yeah.
So that doesn't start until July. So it'll be the 30.1% for half of the year, and then it bumps up another percentage point after that. And we are comfortable with that in our base budget for the projections for next year.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
I think I see our chair calling.
I'm sorry, I was talking to a muted microphone. Director Corbett, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I see obviously the contributions to the fund going down and stabilizing. Do we think, though, that we may need to adjust those if we continue to see COVID impacts impacting PERS and their investments and potentially triggering even greater increases that PERS requires us to make?
Yes, the original plan was put together with the information that was available. We work annually with our actuaries to project what the future costs are and the future liabilities. Also, when we put the plan together, we had not implemented yet kind of our three-prong approach to reducing pension costs, right? Utilizing the trust is one very significant way that the district is moving forward to reduce long-term liabilities related to pensions. And the other ways that we have been managing our pension cost is that we have been kind of prepaying the annual, the monthly contributions, right? And achieving some savings directly from PERS on the interest that they would be charging us when we, rather than paying monthly, we're paying upfront every 6 months. And I don't have the exact savings on that. But then also for the last 2 years, utilizing some of our mid-year opportunity funds, the board has approved lump sums to go to PERS to pay down our long-term liability and achieve an overall cost savings. And I think with our most recent contribution in that area, the board approved $1 million. A PERS actuary stated that that would give a long-term savings of, I think, 1.5 or $1.7 million. So all of those things that we're doing, is that right, Michelle? Thank you. All of those things that we're doing can affect how these projections go out. But of course, the overwhelming reason rates change is because of the market, right? Is PERS hitting their targets or are they not hitting their targets? So we absolutely will keep looking at this and rebalancing whether or not we should continue to contribute to the trust or whether it's okay to start just drawing on the trust And when we come back with our actuarial information, we'll see that long-term 20-year picture.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. And I would just like to comment, I know we all appreciate the fact that we established this fund and see it as a really important tool for keeping our pension costs in line and being responsible, overseers of our resources. So it's really great, and so appreciate that this started back in 2017.
Director Rosario?
Sorry, I forgot one thing. I want to, for Randy, in our real estate holdings, I know that residential, I've been reading that residential is pretty much holding steady, but the real effect of COVID is in office spaces.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if, well, do you think those will balance out, or will the office spaces, will that drag down earnings in that real estate portfolio?
Yeah, it's a good question. What typically happens, there's actually a lot of other sort of subcategories of real estate as well, like tower REITs. So with 5G coming out, you're going to have the tower REITs possibly, making up for some of the loss. When you have less folks in the office and more folks buying online, then what we call is industrial REITs, or REITs, warehouse REITs. Basically, they're REITs that own warehouses that are partnering with online providers to store the goods as they go through the distribution channel. But so there's a lot of combination of factors when we're considering that. The REITs on the residential side are more kind of geared towards the apartments, which are mixed, right? Because in suburban areas good, in urban areas not so good. As the areas of REITs that get impacted, they find a floor, if you will. But as all the good ones continue to gain share in that REIT fund, it stabilizes the REIT investment. So that's kind of how that works. But for sure, your point's well taken. If we do see a resumption of economic activity, that leads to the office space starting to get repopulated, right? People starting to go back to work, then that will certainly help out the REIT investment. Now, one point I want to make here is we actually reduced our REIT holdings actually somewhat earlier this year. So we actually haven't, we haven't been kind of plagued as much by the returns. It's a very low portion of the portfolio.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Back to Director Corbett.
I would just add to that, obviously it's good to keep an eye on the REITs. There's been plenty of speculation that with people working from home, that may become the trend, and a lot of large corporate entities may continue the model of people working from home and releasing these big office spaces. That might be a new trend going forward. So hopefully it all balances out.
All right, Randy, the reason we have equities in this portfolio, stocks in other words, is because the district is allowed to invest in a broader scope of investment vehicles than we are with our surplus funds. Is that correct? So this isn't strictly fixed income investment. And maybe Deborah, I should address this to you, is our strategy that Randy describes as moderately conservative, which is an interesting phrase. Does that vary from our investment strategies with other pension funds? And if so, for any reason?
This pension trust does have its own investment policy that the board approved. So it is separate from our regular district-wide portfolio, and it allows for longer terms of investing. investments of longer terms, and it allows for the equities. The category, I think there's about 4 or 5 risk categories that PARS and Highmark have. And we are, I think, maybe second to the most conservative. Is that correct, Randy?
Yes, that's correct. So it starts at conservative, moderately conservative, moderate, balanced, and then capital appreciation, exactly. And
right.
I think maybe that to touch upon a comment, Colin, is that moderately conservative for pension is the most used strategy for pension. So you are in the strategy that most agencies use for pension, but it's closely followed by moderate. It's like 1% or 2% different.
Well, what I was getting to is I was curious whether we're a little more aggressive with this fund, given its nature as a reserve fund, rather than how you would characterize it, a dedicated fund for specific purposes, where it just had to be there. That we maybe with this the nature of this fund, its reserve status allows us to be a little more aggressive, even though we're still very conservative. Is that fair?
That is absolutely correct. And that is one of the benefits of using the pension trust as a vehicle for investing this long-term money. Absolutely.
Right. So I want to make sure I was reading that right. Thank you. That's helpful. Just a administrative note, will someone be getting back on behalf of the committee or the district to Ted Radosevich on his question?
Yes, Deborah Spalding's been communicating with him, and I think we may have already responded, but we'll let him know that we did address his comments at the meeting.
Okay, that's very good. And we'll then be able to move on to the next agenda item. Is it still true that we don't have any public comments on this one?
That is correct. Thank you.
All right, then we will move to item 2, adjustments to the 2020 general fund budget in response to the COVID pandemic. And I believe that is AGM Ocker.
Yes, Director Coffey, thank you very much. And I'll have Deborah go to the next slide. So as we've been talking to the board about this pandemic since the spring, you're all aware that it definitely has impacted our agency and many other businesses and governments. So, some of the things specific to the district, which you're all aware of, is that the pandemic has delayed, canceled our programs, and we've reinvented programs. So all of our different summer programs, we've had, since March, we've had no rental of facilities or picnic areas. We've collected no day use fees since the pandemic. We were required basically to cancel our summer focus of all of our programming and swim season. And therefore we did not hire any seasonal staff. And there was a pretty significant delay in our recruitments. So I'm going to go over all the details of this. The goal today is to educate you on where we expect that we'll be by the end of the year on the general fund revenues and expenditures and the budget amendments that we're recommending to bring to the board at the second meeting in October. So, and I think our Deputy General Manager, Dr. Alvarez, has been able to join us now. So she's here if there's any questions. So here's just a picture of our general fund. The revenue side, property tax, as you know, is about 90% of our revenue source. It is our largest contribution to our operations of the district. And early on, we were concerned that our property tax was going to have some delinquencies, right? The county withheld 5%. And so we weren't sure what was going to happen, but in August, we got our true up payments and the delinquencies did not appear to be significant for this year. And so we do believe that we will hit our budget target for general property tax overall this year. Remember, the levy and the property taxes were assessed before COVID. And so the property tax for this year through December has not really been affected except for people not being able to pay. And in Alameda County, if they don't pay right away, then eventually the delinquencies and the overdue payments do filter through back to the district. So property tax is looking okay. Of course, in the future, there's a couple of other items on our agenda today where we're going to talk more about property tax for the future. So we're not recommending any adjustments there, but charges for services, right, where we are providing programs and charging fees, that's where we've had a significant hit. And, you know, about over $7 million is expected to be our shortfall for this year. We've refunded up to $1 million in reservations that had previously been paid, and that's included in this number. And I'm going to go over the details of that, but it's about only 15% of what we had budgeted. And, you know, certainly some of that came in at the beginning of the year before we went into shelter in place. And then before I go to the details of those revenues, I'll just touch on the grant reimbursement there. So, you know, the district has a great grant program, but the only one I'm really highlighting here is the COVID-related grant that the district has received. And that's through FEMA and the state OES. And we have authorization for just over $1 million. We're hoping that will grow. As we talked about, we don't know if additional stimulus will come through the federal government. But for now, we do know that we can charge against our overtime and some of our supplies and services that we have expended that are directly related to the pandemic. So when you net those two out, we have over $6 million that we're looking for in amendments. So now let's go to the next slide, Deborah, thank you. And we'll just talk about what are the areas of those revenue shortfalls. And so here you can see all of these negatives, right? This is where we are not getting the money in. Parking, we're only getting about 7% of what we budgeted and what we normally get every year. For camping, 8%, you know, only $1.1 million. Our recreation programs are 7%. The rentals of facilities and picnic areas, of course, those were all through the summer. We get the most, so only 4% of that we're expecting to bring in. Concessions, right? You may recall that we did work very closely. Tiffany Margalisi, our business services manager, is on the meeting today, and she worked very hard with our concessionaires, providing them with relief or some extra time to make their payments. Some of the concessionaires have been able to open under modified circumstances. And so we do think that we might get just over 50% of our expected revenue from them, the golf courses and some of the other concessionaires. Certainly some of them did not open, so we know that as well. And then fishing and boating as of Monday of, is it this Monday? No, next Monday. I think we're gonna try to start to bring back some fishing and boating. So we have, you know, maybe we'll bring in 20% of what we budgeted there. The swim season is 0% because we had to cancel our entire swim season. And the Regional Park Foundation, this is just one of the areas where the Regional Park Foundation provides funding to the district, and that's for specific programs. So they normally will help with camperships and, you know, providing scholarships for some different people to join our programs. This year, since we didn't have the programs, they've really been working hard to pivot and try to figure out how they can still provide support to the district. So, you know, we're expecting maybe just under half of what they would typically provide. So that's our total of where we are not receiving our shortfall in revenue. I'll go to the expenditure side now. So with the fact that we are not receiving all of that revenue, we have to make cuts in our expenditure side, right? So we can meet our budget. So the most significant area where we're proposing cuts is under salaries and benefits, also in some areas of supplies and services that were directly affected by the pandemic. So next slide. On the salaries and benefits side, I just grouped it into two categories. As I mentioned, when shelter in place hit, we basically just froze all of our recruitments, and it took us a while to figure out how to move forward in this new environment and continue the the recruitments that were in process, and then even kick off new recruitments. And I will say we have been successful. We've figured out how to do it virtually. We've been filling some of our vacancies this year. So that's been good, but we do expect that overall throughout the year, there's a $3 million in salary savings due to all of those delays. And then certainly even once we did decide that we were able to go forward with recruitments, we've kind of purposely, just made sure that we're not, we've slowed down our recruitments. We're looking at a recession and we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So making sure we're filling the high priority positions that are approved by the general manager and moving those forward. And then on the seasonal staffing area, since we canceled our entire summer focus, our swim season, we did not bring on all the normal seasonal staff that we bring on and temporary staff to run our kiosk and run all of our recreation programs. The lifeguards were able to come on for maybe about a 2-week period to get their training, and then we released them. And we did early on communicate with all these seasonal staff to let them know that we didn't have work for them, so that they could either file for unemployment or find other opportunities. So that's about a $2.6 million savings since we didn't hire those temporary staff. And then the other categories, you can see there's direct nexus to what's been going on, right? We haven't been driving as much, so we have fuel savings. We didn't have any big planned events, or, we haven't been using those kinds of meeting supplies. Our interpretation and recreation programs didn't happen or are happening virtually, so we have a savings there. On the services side, we certainly haven't been traveling. Any training and conferences have been done virtually, so there's a big savings there. And our summer programs with the bus transportation that we offer to certain groups was not necessary this year because we didn't have those programs. So that is how we are cutting our budget in order to make up for that very significant revenue loss. So the next slide kind of pulls it all together to show that is what we'll be recommending to the board for approval and would like your support on, is that we will be adjusting our revenues down and adjusting our expenditures down in the general fund for those related areas. Now, with this, if you might remember at mid-year, we did set some money aside that we might need to tap into. And with this forecast, we're hoping we don't have to tap into that. Certainly other uncertainties can come up. The fire season has not helped. We've spent over $500,000 in, with the wildfires with no federal or state reimbursement available at this time. So we still have that $2.7 million smoothing fund that we set aside for other things that will come in the future that are unexpected. Next slide. I think that's just touching on the fact that we have had a few other disasters. We had a fire at our Vasco Hills equipment shop and the lightning complex that did directly affect 6 of our parks. And we're looking right now and doing assessments out there at mainly the grazing infrastructure and some of the remediation that has to be done due to, the fire crews being out there and working and just kind of prepping up for a rainy season and making sure we know what to expect. So we're also, in addition to the COVID related, we would like to bring a couple of other budget adjustments, appropriating funds in these 2 areas for, so that we can get started on repairs. We'll be seeking insurance funds for those also, so it hopefully will not impact the general fund too much. So that, I think, is my last slide, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Directors. Director Corbett, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Deborah. This is always a good time of year to take stock on how things are going. It is a little sobering, looking at how COVID has impacted our budget, but also our ability to provide services. And I appreciate your guidance through this in adjusting, but also, gives me pause to think about, the actual real human impacts. Obviously, salaries are things people depend on, and I know we're doing our best to balance our books, but just to stop for a second and say, we're just sorry we're not able to operate at full speed, and we thank those that are making sacrifices during this time. So, but I just wanted to say, I think these are very good recommendations. I think we all look forward to the time in the not too distant future where we're running at full speed, and these numbers change. But I do think these are good, strong numbers to forward on to the board. The one item that I'm looking at, the bus transportation. I know every year we're quite excited that we provide this access to our students. And I know we're doing it in other ways. We have very talented staff that are doing online field trips and such. So we appreciate that. But I just wonder, looking forward and knowing we often don't have enough money to support those programs for all the students that want to take part in them, whether this provides any opportunity to look at ways to set even a little something aside for when things start going again. So I know that that's really not the best thing to be asking for, knowing that we're crunching numbers right now. But I just want to make sure when we come out of this, we continue to be able to provide full access to our parks for all. And then again, just recognize that we are doing a lot of really great creative online programs to backfill those kinds of programs. But in any event, yeah, it's a bit sobering, but appreciate the number crunching that helps us balance these books and continue to provide the services that we do provide. So thank you.
Yeah, Director Corbett, I will point out these are adjustments for 1 year. So these are not adjustments that I'm recommending carry forward to the future. They are 1 year. And as we're developing the 2021 budget, we also see some, pretty significant reductions in the revenue in that charges for services area. And so we're having to adjust for that in the next year's budget. Yes. And we're just looking at the park district in very small snapshot pictures, which isn't always so helpful. We really do need to look 5 years out. And later on the agenda, we're going to talk about some of our long-term liabilities and some of the things that are things that require long-term planning. And at the next meeting, we'll bring, some of the budget information for the next year and some of the 5-year projections so that we can look. Government is such that the property tax numbers, it takes a while to hit us. So we don't want to be blind to that. We know that it can get much worse, that this is still pretty status quo. And so we need to look out for the future of 1 or 2 years and also be prepared to react if the state or the legislature takes any action of shifting revenues around, which always comes as a surprise, and it shouldn't be because it happens every time there's a big recession. So those are all things we still need to look at.
Yes, and Deborah, I have been thinking about that too. I am quite concerned about how we plan for the future, knowing that some of the COVID impacts will be trailing, especially with the real property revenue. And I'm looking forward. I know we will be doing this as we go through all of our budget deliberations, but I'm really earnestly looking forward to where we can start having those discussions for planning for the future, for the 5-year plan. I think we have to be very realistic in knowing that as we come out of this, that there can be impacts. As you mentioned, the state may be trailing with their deficits and looking at local governments and maybe, cutting funding. That's a real issue. And, we're a park district that continues to grow as well. We have another item on the agenda today where we're going to be putting together a fund to support some really great open space lands, but that's, you know, also something that will have impacts into the future, and we should be looking forward to where operating funds will be coming from for what we have now and what we're going to be opening in the future. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I hope that we have those conversations soon, because I think pre-planning 5 years will be here in a nick of time. So I'm really I'm worried, but I'm also you know, quite interested and ready to start those discussions to make sure we continue to have such a you know, a strong fiscal situation to keep running our parks, which we do. I always feel very good about that. So thank you for the important news.
I think I could read his lips. He said, Director Rosario.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the space bar wasn't working for some reason. I hit the space bar and it doesn't release. Sorry. Thank you, Director Rosario.
The grant, the FEMA and OES grant, will that backfill the general fund that for those expenditures?
The FEMA grant will cover some of the overtime costs, certainly, that we had due to COVID, and some of the supplies, the PPE and things like that we've purchased, and maybe some of the services. We've done a lot of public information, but it certainly won't cover all of the costs or the loss of productivity that we incurred. It's just a small slice.
Okay. Is that reflected in your numbers?
The $1 million I am showing to kind of give back to the extra overtime that we have incurred.
Great. And then I just want to comment on the 30 vacancies. Since I've been elected on the board, I've been focused on that. That I think a lot of our parks and a lot of our staff, from the bottom to the top, we are understaffed. And to not fully fund our existing permanent positions, especially when we have two major events, the pandemic and fire, it's stretching our field people, even our administration, in so thin that people we're unable to provide this kind of services that we need to provide, and our people are tired. And having lived through the first recession as a park supervisor, it's really telling on staff, just having to deal with if you're short one person, if you have an on-call firefighter that is at fires, you've lost that person for several weeks. In our present scenario, we're losing them for long periods of time, and with no backfill, it's tough on everybody. And I think we need to, I mean, 3 million, 30 positions, that's, like you said, it's $3 million about. That, to me, that's affordable. If we can't, to keep our services, and also just to benefit the health of our people out in the field, and also administration. Because I think this pandemic and these fires have really shown that if there's a weakness in this park district, is that we are understaffed. And to continue our services and to protect the public, we need to, as much as possible, keep those numbers not to be that large. So I'm just advocating for keeping up our staff as it is.
So I would note that DGM Alvarez has joined the meeting on this agenda item. And Anna, I think you wanted to comment and respond to Director Rosario for him.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair Coffey. And Director Rosario, I understand your concerns and share your concerns. you should know that as we're looking at pacing the recruitments, field staff, particularly out in the parks, they have #1 priority. So we are not in any way delaying filling those vacancies. Those continue through in their regular timing. So there's no, there hasn't really been a slowdown per se, and they have been prioritized, and they will continue to be prioritized in the coming years. You should also know that the reason why I'm joining the Finance Committee a little bit late is because precisely I was having a meeting with our new Human Resources Recruitment Unit. And we were just discussing the importance and how critical it is that we continue to resource correctly the Park District. And I will acknowledge that, as Deborah has shared with you, there has been a brief pause, very insignificant, when we transitioned to working remotely. But the timing in filling these recruitments are in pace with the priorities of each of the departments. So what that means is that each department has a master plan and prioritizes their vacancies. And we're following with that with one slight tweak, which has been because of the COVID and because we are delivering such a critical public health resource through keeping our parks open. The #1 priority has been field positions. And then part of the problem is that we've also had a little bit of high turnover in human resources, which we're addressing as part of the 2021 budget proposal. But we have an amazing team that I just met today. And I feel really confident that we will be able to continue to move quickly on what remains. So the projections that CFO Acker shared with you are not necessarily savings by freezing positions, but rather in the delay on how positions or how the boots in the grounds come in to the district to do the work. And that's really led by each of the departments. I hope that helps.
Director Corbett?
I very much appreciate Dee's question and also the answer from the DGM. I acknowledge that, in order to balance the books, we have to figure out what's the best priority, and obviously delaying the filling of positions can mean avoiding layoffs or other types of cuts. So I understand that that's a balance that we look at, and I appreciate the sensitivity that's being taken in the balance. And I would just like to maybe piggyback on what Dee was saying, and it sounds like the answer is already present, and that is as we look, obviously, as positions open up, they open up various different places, and then we look at that as a place to help us balance the budget. And I hope that we are prioritizing, as the DGM has said, with regard to field, but also places, so such sensitive places like making sure we have adequate staff in HR, which is so needed at this time, and also to take a look at other positions that may need priorities over others, which is always such a difficult choice. Obviously, everything is a priority, but I just hope that we are looking at that as we plan to try to figure out as we backfill and balance these books with openings and the amount of money we have, that we make sure that we're making those really hard choices for what's most needed. And I think we can see that there has been, it's sort of been difficult in HR this year with the amount of work that is needed to be done for an agency of our size, and then the staff trying to accommodate all those needs. So, we appreciate your focus on that.
Thank you, Director Corbett. If there isn't an immediate response to Director Corbett, let me see if I can generalize my colleagues' observations here in the context of what we're doing in terms of adjustments to the general fund budget. And I think, yeah, I'm teeing up a thought for management to confirm or correct me. But the good thing that's going on here is we're suffering shortfalls in revenues because of the unforeseen hits that we're taking as a result of the coronavirus and the fires and related expenditures. So we're taking a hit on revenues and new expenditures. We're not, in making these budget adjustments, seeking to cut funding to ongoing existing services anywhere. We have the advantage of not being reliant on sales taxes, as many public agencies are, and as a result are looking at the same budget adjustments you're looking at, Deborah Ocker, and to balance the books, they got to cut services to ongoing programs that are generally beneficial, but have to do that. We're not doing that, and that strikes me as something to feel good about, because I think how we're managing this, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm noticing is that we're adjusting expenditures, many of which are falling in the category of salaries, but they're salaries connected with services that aren't ongoing, just didn't come into existence, like the swim programs and the lifeguards and such. So we didn't have to adjust for existing services or initiate layoffs. We're going with the flow of, as we lose revenues out of services provided fees, that naturally creates expenditure fall offs. And you folks, it seems to me, are managing that very well, because it isn't lost on me that the fall off in revenues, roughly $6 million, and the decrease in expenditures at Apollo are roughly the same, without, again, dipping into ongoing services and cutting jobs that are already there. So I appreciate that. I think it's a sign of good management that people are on top of exactly what revenues we're losing and what expenditures drop as a direct result of those services not being provided. It's a good management of this problem. And as a result, again, as I keep saying, we're not cutting services that were ongoing, and we're not dipping heavily into reserves. We're hitting on reserves, but not a lot. So I take that all as a good sign and appreciated of staff's work. Any comment with that? Otherwise, I guess we could move on.
Thank you, Director Coffey.
Okay, so could you?
Any other comments?
Okay, so I'm hopefully not too far off on that. Do you want to put up your recommendation that we need, if you could, Deborah? We have a motion that we need.
Sure, I'll have Deb Spalding share her screen.
This will be to make the recommended budget allocations as presented. Adjustments to the Board of Directors for favorable consideration, discuss and direct staff to submit the general fund budget. I think it's more specific than that, actually, and we have specific budget adjustments that have been recommended and presented to us. And we will be recommending those to the full board for adoption. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right, so a motion to that effect? Yes?
Director Coffey, can we just double check to make sure we don't have any public comments on this item?
That may have come in since we commenced. Please do.
Chair Coffey, we have no public comments on this item.
Okay.
Okay, so if I characterize the motion that you need correctly, then I'd look for a motion and a second from my colleagues.
So moved.
Director Rosario, Director Corbett, second. I'll second. Ellen?
A second.
Okay,
Eight.
Director Corbett will second. Please take the roll.
Thank you. Director Corbett,
Can you,
would you please repeat that?
can you hear me?
Oh, now we can hear you. Yes, thank you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, Ellen, we're getting the slow-mo internet effect here on you. So
Yes, Director Corbett.
There's a really weird buzzing.
okay, we'll record Director Corbett as
I'm
I.
an I.
Yeah, okay, and Director
There is
Rosario.
an issue with,
Thank you, Director
Thank you.
Corbett and
I'm an
Director
aye.
Rosario. And Director Coffey,
Aye. So we passed the motion unanimously. And with that, we will move to item number 3, allocation of lease revenues from preserved lands in East Contra Costa. As Director Corbett mentioned, there's a proposal for additional funding for future land acquisitions, and this is a item for action, and Christina Kelchner will present. Christina?
Hey, can you hear me fine?
gonna sign out and sign back in.
Okay. It sounds like Director Corbett's going to sign out and sign back in, but I'll
Sure.
get started.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not sure the issue is on your end or mine. It's hard to tell.
Ellen, you might want to try closing your video, and maybe your system will take your audio better. Or just go in and out. There's a drag on your connection.
I'm gonna try sign.
Good.
Okay. Should I proceed?
Yeah, go ahead, Christina. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Coffey. Christina Kelchner, Assistant General Manager of Acquisition, Stewardship, and Development. We are here today to talk about an item related to the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservation Plan. I'm very pleased to have with me today the Executive Director of the Conservancy that leads the HCP, Abby Fateman. And I know Abby is actually headed out to Roddy Ranch Golf Course right now, but she just wanted to pop on and say hello and stay with us as long as she can. So Abby, you just want to say hello to the directors?
Yes, hi everybody. I'm gonna actually switch to the phone while I'm driving so I can listen, and if there are questions, I'll try to unmute myself, but I did want to get the chance to, I guess, see you in person, have you seen me in person, and say hi. So I'll be listening to the conversation, and thank you, Christina, Naoma, Philip, and other staff, Deborah and Deb, who have all been working on this. It's been a big effort with all of the divisions, actually. So thank you, and I'll be hitting the road here. So good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Abby. Very much appreciate Abby and her staff.
Nice to see you, Abby.
Appreciate Abby and her staff working hard with us to move this forward. And I did want to thank also Naoma Laval from our planning department, Philip Coffin from land, and Deb Spalding have all been very involved in this. So they are here to help answer questions as well. So we are talking today about lease revenues that are generated by lands that were purchased in partnership between the Conservancy and the Park District, which we call the preserved lands or the HCP lands. And many of those lands came with existing leases on them. And so they're wind turbine leases, residential leases, telecommunication towers, and those properties actually generate revenues for the Conservancy and the district. And so what we're here to talk about today is how those lease revenues have been used over the past 10 years that we've been collecting them, and an agreement that we have proposed for how to use those lease revenues going forward. As you'll see in the presentation, most of the lease revenues have been used for operating costs, for park staff, for equipment, for operating the preserved lands. However, some fraction of it has been set aside over the past 10 years to help create an endowment that will be held by the Regional Parks Foundation. And that endowment is a long-term funding source for management costs of the preserved lands going forward. So this is the staff recommendation. This is what we'll be talking about. We have a lease revenue allocation agreement. So between the Park District and the Conservancy for the allocation of those lease revenues going forward, and then a transfer from the lease revenues, which are held by the district, to the Conservancy. And the Conservancy will give those back to the foundation for establishment of the endowment. Just to back up for a moment and remind everybody as a refresher, I know everyone's familiar, but the purpose of the HCP, this is actually a permit that is authorized under the federal and state Endangered Species Acts. What it does is instead of doing a project by project, development by development look at the impacts and the mitigation, it allows a regional approach so that we can have a large connected preserve system to protect endangered species in East County. And also provide some certainty for developers. The funding mechanism is that developers pay fees in exchange for their mitigation requirements being met. And so far, since 2010, we and the HCP together have purchased about 14,000 acres. So that's the overview. Because the lands are both for conservation and they will allow some public access and passive recreation. There's a cost sharing agreement that's baked into the original HCP plan, which is that the Conservancy will pay for all costs to manage the land that are related to protection of the species and the habitat, and the district is responsible for recreation costs, the costs of the public accessing the properties. Since 2009, the developer fees have not really been enough to pay for all the land management costs due to the recession that we had in 2009. And because this is a many decades long plan and we're just in the first few years of it here, fortunately, as I mentioned, many of those properties did come with leases that generate revenues. And so those leases have been used and will continue to be used to cover the management costs. So this is a map showing all of the properties that we've purchased, 37 different properties. 11 of those properties generate revenue from leases. As you can see, there's a mix of wind leases, residential leases, and telecommunication leases. Altogether, those leases generate about $500,000 a year, with about half of that amount being from wind turbine leases. So since 2010, when we started collecting these lease revenues and putting them into a fund, which we call at the district our 259 fund, it's just the district's accounting where we put all that money. And we've spent about 57% of those lease revenues on current operations, so covering park staff, equipment. And then there's a balance currently in the fund of about 2.16 million. So part of what the agreement that we're asking for approval of today, a recommendation to the full board for approval of, is to allocate formally those lease revenues, the 2.16 million that's currently in the fund, and then the incoming lease revenues that will continue into the future. There's 3 different buckets that those lease revenues can be used for. Current management, which is largely what we have been using them for. The Perpetual Endowment Fund, which the Regional Parks Foundation will hold for future long-term operation and management. And then also there's some money set aside for land acquisition, future land acquisitions. And those categories come out of this whole cascade of agreements. So this is just an overview of the HCP, the original plan itself in 2009. Then there was an implementing agreement. Then each of the 37 properties had its own funding agreement. And there was a provision in 11 of those about how to spend the lease revenues. And so now we're creating a lease revenue agreement that bundles all of that into one agreement that governs the lease revenues for all of the properties. And this is the breakdown of the percentages. It's not the same for all of the properties because the agreements were different at the time of purchase. But you can see that the bulk of the costs go for current management, with smaller amounts going to fund acquisitions and to the endowment. So the agreement proposes to allocate the 2.16 million, the current balance, and that is through the end of the second quarter through June 30th of 2020, with about $500,000 going to current management, $500,000 to land acquisition, and then just over $1 million going to seed the endowment. And just a word about the endowment. This is a requirement of the HCP. The plan itself does require a permanent funding source for long-term habitat management. Just like when you get a permit under the Endangered Species Act and you have a conservation easement and that requires an endowment, this is the same kind of mechanism to provide for long-term funding. And it's part of how the resource agencies create assurance that there will always be a funding source to protect the species and the habitat. The Conservancy did go through a competitive process. They did an RFP. They interviewed several nonprofits, and they selected the Regional Parks Foundation to hold the endowment. The plan does call for the endowment to grow to 80 million by the end of 2037, which is the end of the permit term and when the endowment takes over. The inputs into the endowment, the bulk of that is the developer fees. There's also some real estate transfer taxes, and then the contributions from the lease revenues is what we're talking about today. The endowment interest cannot be spent until 2037, so will be set aside and grown in this fund until 2037. And then at some point between now and 2037, the Park District and the Regional Parks Foundation will enter into an agreement for future management for distribution of those costs. And so hopefully the graph here is easy to understand, but today the Park District is recommending taking the lease revenue and giving that to the Conservancy. And the Conservancy will turn around and give that to the Parks Foundation, which in 2037 then will come back to the district in form of interest on that endowment to cover management costs. The approval schedule for these agreements and for the seed money for the endowment, we're here before you today with these two items. And then pending your recommendation, we'd like to bring it to the full board on October 6th. That will be for, again, approval of the lease revenue agreement and then the transfer of the 1 million out of the district's fund into the Conservancy for the endowment. And then Executive Director Bateman will take it to her board of the Habitat Conservancy on October 16th. They'll be, that board will be asked to approve those same two actions plus the endowment agreement that is between the Regional Parks Foundation and the Conservancy. That agreement has already been approved by the Regional Parks Foundation board earlier this year. So once it's approved by the Conservancy, we'll be ready to deposit the money and start earning some interest on that. And then I just wanted to say a word about public access on our HCP lands. We have obviously been purchasing lands now for 10 years, and we're still anxiously awaiting to have some trails open and some public access on those lands. So I wanted to just give you a brief overview and update of where we are with that. This is, again, the cascade of agreements that needs to happen. So the plan, the Habitat Conservation Plan, 2007, implementing agreement, 2009 or 10. We are now working on the preserve management plans. I think you're all familiar with that. We do hope to bring those forward in 2021 and get those finalized. They're getting very close. We have another meeting with the resource agencies November 4th that hopefully we'll be able to get largely finalized. Those do have to be approved by the resource agencies. And then another part of that exercise is to do a property analysis report, which is a fancy name for a big spreadsheet that has all of the line items for what the costs are, the tasks and the costs associated with managing the properties. And the table on the right here just gives an overview of some of the categories of that go into that property analysis report. So these are some of the categories of tasks that are required to manage those lands, both for species and for public access. And then once we have that all agreed on in terms of what the universe of costs are, then we will line by line negotiate with the Conservancy to parse out what is habitat management and what is public access costs. So that's what's coming next. But for today, we're just focused on the lease revenue allocation agreement and the transfer of the just over $1 million for seed funding for the endowment, which will be combined with another $1 million from the Conservancy. That money comes from pre-plan costs, so 2006 and earlier, that the Conservancy has been holding. So Abby and her team will combine her money with our money to have just over $2 million to seed the endowment. And that is all I have for you. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Christina. And I want, before asking for director's questions, Deborah Ocker.
I just wanted to make sure the board was really clear to know that the money that we're discussing, the lease revenue money, is completely outside of the general fund. It's in a special fund. It's accumulated to over $2 million right now. So the money that we're talking about moving around was earmarked and set aside for this purpose. And it isn't part of our previous discussion at all.
Yeah, in other words, this is money that was generated by the land and would have been appropriated and spent on the land for the same purposes that we're proposing to use the funds at this point for an endowment. And the reason we're doing an endowment is by reason of the association with the HCP and its regulatory requirements. Is that also the reason why we're doing an endowment through a third party? Not that I feel the Parks Foundation is a distant third party, but a nonprofit organization, or in this case, it works with our foundation, has to be the holder of the endowment. Is that why we're doing this?
That's correct. And Deb may be able to speak to that a little more. But yes, that is a requirement of the plan, the HCP plan. And for the Park District's own projects, as you're all aware, we were able to negotiate something with the resource agencies that we don't have to have an endowment. And we're able to just set aside the reserve fund of $500,000, as we've talked about, which helps to really save the Park District funding, because that is all general fund money, because that's our mitigation for our projects. In this case, as Deborah said, the endowment is being created not with general fund money, but with developer fees and with lease revenues. So it's not coming out of the district's general fund. And so I think it was less important to us, less critical that we not have an endowment, because it's not that general fund hit. Deborah, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I just also wanted to state that the HCP went through the whole exercise of determining who the best endowment holder would be, right? They interviewed and assessed many different organizations and determined that the Regional Park Foundation is the one that they selected.
All right, Director Rosario, any questions?
The question is, we spend $57,000 annually to manage those lands, correct? So what will we have to draw on the once what money's been accumulated in that 259 fund is exhausted, because we're going to be funneling money into the trust. Will we have to go into? Will we have to spend general fund money for the $57,000 annually until 2037?
Thank you, Director Rosario. That is exactly the right question to ask. And that's the first question we asked when we realized that all of the funding for operations was coming from these lease revenues. And those lease revenues were sort of bonus money. The properties just happened to have, be revenue generating. And so we looked hard at whether we would need to start to cover that with general fund revenues. And so the answer is no. The Conservancy is responsible for covering the costs related to management of the for the species, and that we expect to be the bulk of the costs. And so it's possible that as we open trails and have more recreation, if the lease revenues get low enough, it's possible we might have to dip into a general fund for staffing. That's several years out. And we don't know yet what those costs will look like, because we need to do that negotiation with the Conservancy about what they're paying for and what we're paying for. So I guess I would say not likely. We're hopeful we will not have to dip into the general fund, and it won't be anytime soon.
Okay, thank you. And then I have, regarding leases, I remember Deputy General Manager Anna Alvarez talking, when we were talking about HCP a couple years ago, possibly, that there is a possibility of getting some of this land to use as, well, there's a potential for getting, for being paid for carbon sequestration. Is that a possibility?
Can't hear you, Anna.
Still can't.
May have to take that offline.
Okay.
Right.
Familiar with
Minutes,
that? I do know. So go ahead.
Anna's going to call.
Yeah, I think she's going to try to call in.
Yeah. So basically, the question is, if there's if that's a possibility, would that be included in the lease, or will we have to renegotiate with the will we have to renegotiate that if that is in fact a possibility?
In terms of whether we would get paid for carbon sequestration, maybe that we can do extra. I mean, the land itself sequesters carbon, just to be clear, just the open space itself. If we wanted to do additional carbon sequestration projects, I'm not sure if that is what you have in mind. I don't know that we could get paid for that. The land is already mitigation for development, and sometimes the resource agencies kind of want you to count it once. And so that I would think that's something that would need to be negotiated with the resource agencies.
Okay.
But Anna may have more.
Oh, I think she's on. Nope.
And Deputy General Manager, you are welcome, of course, to use the chat if you have a short comment.
I can also.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. I am sorry, we're just having this having to manage with the technology. So Deputy General Manager, Dr. Ana Alvarez, and I appreciate the conversation, Director Rosario. And like as AGM Kelcher mentioned, the lands themselves serve as a carbon sink, and there might be opportunities with the state of California as part of the cap and trade program.
Oh, we just lost her.
To monetize on these lands or on the carbon sink that's currently existing on the lands. But that's part of the overall cap and trade program with the state of California. And we will continue to look at that because certainly there's a great benefit and value to the types of eco-services benefits that are being provided by these open space and green spaces that are embedded within the urban fabric of 33 cities. And that's important to note because that is where the value of that carbon sink really rests. And we do have preliminary studies that show the value in terms of dollars, in terms of air quality or water quality or other types of eco-services. Now, how it relates to the agreements that we have with HCP, that's a different conversation that Christina Kelcher was shepherding us in, but we will continue to explore the opportunity to monetize on this, on the lands, on the carbon sink.
Great, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? Director Corbett?
I don't know if the question has been asked. First of all, appreciate great opportunity to, continue to provide beautiful open spaces in our district, and great to see that we are putting together this fund to support the operations and maintenance. I guess my question would be, and sorry, I probably missed it, Christina, you probably told us this already. Do we anticipate that this fund will pay for the operation and maintenance completely? Dee's laughing, he probably already asked that question. So that's my question.
Thank you, Director Corbett. I think that's the same question that Director Rosario asked. I think it's the question on everyone's mind. Will we need to dip into the general fund to cover the operation and maintenance of the preserved lands? And Deborah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. At this point, we do not need to dip into the general fund. We don't expect to need to for a few years, but it will depend what happens, obviously, with costs of operation and maintenance and with the lease revenues and how long those leases last and whether they are renewed. And also will depend on our negotiations with the Conservancy about who pays for what and what those costs end up being. Deborah, anything to add to that? Yeah.
I'll just add by saying this is one tiny little step of the long relationship we will continue to have with the HCP. And I think if the general manager were able to be here, he would say, when we negotiated these deals, it was determined that the HCP would pay for the management cost, that's required through those agreements, and that the extra for recreational value or extra for public access would be the responsibility of the district. So we still have a bit of work to do to kind of just make sure that all of those agreements are put forward into implementation plans. And this is just one small piece of the long bit of work we have before us as partners in this area. But for the right now and for the near future, the lease revenue is still going to be generating enough to cover our operating costs and the amount that's remaining in fund balance. And we're not anticipating using any other funds except for that leased revenue.
So the plan for now is that we cover the active use type costs. And does HCP cover the more maintenance type costs? Is that what you just said?
I'll take a stab at that. The costs are divided in terms of management for the benefit of species versus the public use of the land. And so the questions come up like with grazing. Grazing is required by the permits, it's required by the resource agencies for the benefit of the species. However, we graze our lands as the park district. And so those are the conversations we're having with the Conservancy. I will just reiterate what Deborah said, which is that the agreements are clear, and it is restated again in this lease revenue allocation agreement that the intention of the Conservancy and of the whole HCP plan is that the developer fees and the other revenue that the Conservancy generates will cover all of the management costs for the protection of the species. These are mitigation lands. They are mitigating for development.
Right.
And so the developers need to be paying for the management of those lands. To the extent that there are additional costs for recreation, at which we don't have yet, because none of the lands are open at this point. So arguably all of the current costs are for management of the species because there is no public use of those lands. But to the extent that there are any additional costs related purely to recreation, then at some point we may have to look at district monies for those costs.
And that would be in addition to what's in that fund.
Correct.
And the grazing, I'm assuming those contracts are with HCP, so that revenue goes into HCP's funds or?
No, actually, those revenues are with the district. The district is the
Okay.
land manager. And so those, it's just like our regular grazing program. Those revenues go to the district
Okay,
separately
good.
from this lease revenue.
Good to know. Well, this is certainly a beautiful opportunity for us to continue our relationship with HCP. And I would just say that, you know, as we make every decision in expanding our beautiful parklands, that we always make sure we reference the entire district to make sure we can balance our resources and provide services and equity and programming without, you know, upsetting that balance between our urban and suburban areas. So thank you for those efforts and putting this fund together to help take care of these beautiful lands. And otherwise, it sounds good to me.
Okay, directors, if we can then move to a motion on the recommendation from staff. If I have this right, this is a two-part motion you're seeking. One is to approve the allocation agreement with the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservation Plan, and the other part of the motion is to approve the specific allocations being recommended by staff as presented. Is that correct? There it is. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Thank you, Director Coffey. Director Corbett,
Aye.
Director Rosario,
Aye.
and finally, Director Coffey.
And now my turn. Aye.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Move
you.
on. Thank you all, and thank you for the presentation. We'll move on to Ren Bates' quarterly report.
Second motion.
Do you need two motions or
Second
just one
motion
for
required?
both?
I treated those as one motion with two parts.
Oh, okay.
Fine with me.
Good, if that's clear with staff and for the minutes.
All right.
Thank you for clarifying. So we'll move on to Ren, to your quarterly report on job order contracting. And this is an information item.
Yes. Thank you, Director Coffey, committee members. I'm happy to be here to present the quarterly job order contracting update. Let me share my screen real fast. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Just as a sort of brief reminder, job order contracting has become a vital role in our contracting. It's an alternative procurement method to our typical competitive design bid build that that the district employs. That said, we do competitively bid this. As a reminder, job order contracting is a fixed unit, fixed term contract, which allows for the quantities to be fleshed out between the contractor and the district. But to competitively bid it, the contractor bids an adjustment factor and we award based on the lowest adjustment factor. And the adjustment factor is basically overhead, general conditions, anything that's not included in the construction task catalog, which is the fixed unit cost catalog that's provided to us by a consultant, the Gordian Group, which accumulates these costs, and we use them for these contracts. The costs are generated on an annual basis, and per our policy, we do spot checks of costs in that book. We're currently in our third round of contracts, so I'll give an update on that. As a reminder, after our first round, there was an audit, and based on that audit, it is an internal audit, we made recommendations that were incorporated into a revised policy, which was adopted by the board last year. We also revised the procedures based on that, and they were approved by the GM last year as well. We currently have 21 projects in construction. Some of these we say are in construction, they're not actually, because we're waiting for some windows of environmental permitting, but when it's in construction, we've finalized a price, and so that price is here. This list reflects the 21 projects we have going and have been finally costed. You can see that we have a total of over $5.5 million of work currently priced out. As a reminder, the Gordian Group cost is a 5% based on that final approved cost. So that is And that 5% covers everything that the Gordian Group does for us, which is accumulate and make the construction task catalog, help us bid it, and then coordinate with contractors as we develop these approved project costs. It's money well spent, in my opinion. Sorry if I went through that too fast. There are 21 projects there. That is a big list, so I can move forward. I won't read it all, but if you have any questions, I can address questions about projects at the end, but
Okay.
I can move on next to our completed projects. We've completed 5, and to just note the discrepancy between completed and sort of in construction, the pandemic and fires have caused delay in getting us going. I don't know if you recall, but in April, I had very little to report on the last time we came to the finance committee because we were we were on pause for all of our construction projects. And then additionally, we have 10 projects being priced. These are all projects that are of relative importance, and these are being priced now because as we are coming to the term of our annual agreement, so we're coming to the close of this contract or these rounds of contracts. And as you can see by the amount of money we've spent, as a reminder, these were $1 million contracts. We're almost at the limit. And additionally, as a reminder, we increased 2 contracts because of projects that needed to be done in an emergency sort of state. Lisa has joined me today and she will talk about that shortly. I'd like to share some pictures of the projects that are currently ongoing. This is the Del Valle Visitor Center, which has gotten a complete remodel. This is the exterior. We're wrapping this up. It should be done for the architectural work by the end of October, and then exhibits will come in, and hopefully this will be done by end of year, but it's looking very nice. These are photos of the Hayward Shoreline Cogswell Marsh bridge repairs. Some of this work was done last year. We're going to continue it. You can see the piers here. This is a very intense process of repairing these piers. You can see at the water level that they're rotting out as of old wood. So what they do is they jacket these and then pour concrete over them. This work has to be done with the tides. So it's actually a good way to do it as a job order contract, because the job order contracting has normal working hours and after hours. So some of this work has to be done at night. And so there's a factor that allows that, and job order contracting is a good way to deliver this type of project. Here's another project out at Hayward Shoreline. They were fixing the marsh levee. So you can see here that they key in. This is an interesting fact that they key in so that this doesn't slough off and flow into the marsh. So big equipment, big rocks. Another project that's going is in Huckleberry. There's a culvert replacement and stream restoration. I like to think of this as a mini McCosker. It's very similar to what we're doing in McCosker, but on a much smaller scale. And this creek is already existing, so it's a good project. Because we are replacing a culvert, McCosker is entirely different because we're rebuilding the creek. So it's probably not the same, but that's what I think of when I see this. And then we also have substantially completed the Contra Loma Swim Lagoon waterproofing. The picture here shows filling it in or doing the top coating and waterproofing, and the main picture shows it refilled. So we're pretty much done with this one, and it's turned out really well. Again, it was good to have job order contracting because it allows us to deliver this repair in a timely fashion, which would have not happened had we had to bid it directly. Another project that has been completed is the Camp Arroyo yurt repair, which turned out relatively nice. And now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. She's joined us today, and she'll give us a summary of round 3 and what we will move forward going next. Lisa.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Ren. Good afternoon, directors. I'm Lisa Gorgon, Chief of Design. So I wanted to finish up this presentation this third round of job contracts. So this slide just shows the project across the district, and then I want to follow up with moving forward. So this slide complete projects that are identified in blue dots Projects that are in construction are in orange, and projects that we're pricing and moving ahead are in yellow. So there's 3 projects that are highlighted on the right side in yellow, and these were projects that Ren mentioned previously that were not planned, but that were needed, that we needed to start on immediately due to health safety, and then also just securing and maintaining our infrastructure so we don't lose anything. So it's a great example of that, where that levee really puffing into the bay. I think as Ren mentioned, we came to the committee back in April and then the full board in May to increase the correct amounts for 2 of the job contractors that we could accommodate that work. Last month, folks who administer the JOC programs
Did she freeze? Did I freeze?
He's frozen.
A lot of freezing going on
Did
today.
Lisa freeze? Is Lisa frozen?
Lisa.
Am I frozen too?
You're
No.
frozen. Well, your voice isn't, but your picture is now.
Okay, I'll turn off the video and then maybe.
Oh, now he
Is
can't
that
hear you.
okay?
Yes, now, for now.
Thank you, Lisa.
Is so my screen still shows the map, and I'm happy to continue.
Yes, please.
Okay. With all of the folks who manage the JOC program, that's with management service. This meeting was in coordination to prepare for the 2020 cycle and to identify projects and that we knew were upcoming, and to prepare for 4th round of JOC contracts to determine if we needed to do that. So, so we did identify there was a project for basically the project they do for our trail creeks and demolitions, roofing, paving.
Lisa, you may want to close your video and see if that works better.
Thanks, Colin.
Go ahead. It doesn't appear to work better. Any suggestions?
2 cans and some string.
I wonder if
So
Ren,
maybe I can just pick up where she left off. Apologize for the technical difficulties. So I believe what Lisa was going to say is that we did meet with Deco Mass Management Services folks to identify the need for a 4th round and can ensure, I mean, the way that our last 3 rounds have gone, it made sense, but we wanted to make sure that there were projects that were queued up and enough capacity that for projects, again, based on our policy over 50K. And there was. So in terms of process for next steps, I think what we need to do is we have used the Gordian Group for a little while now, and based on this being our 3rd round, we are going to put out an RFP to see if there are other entities out here that can help us with this before we enter into our 4th round. So the intent is to put that out in the next month or so that we can see what other consulting firms are available to do this, to help the district manage this program. And then once we have acquired a consultant that can help us with this, we'd like to advertise to bid for the next round of contracts. So we are proposing at this point in time to do the same number of contracts, and that is 3 A's and 3 B's. Again, just as a reminder, the differences are an A license from contracting is a general engineering services contractor that does usually underground work, major earthworks, things of that nature. And a B is a residential license or more of a structure. So they are the contractors we use for like HVAC systems, mechanical systems, roofing repairs, things of that nature. And then we are going to continue. Last round, we went with 2 paving contractors because those are typically A's as well. And so in terms of not using all our capacity because the district owns lots of pavement, we propose to have a paving contractor. And to differentiate between the 3As and the paving is we've just stated that the paving contractor needs to perform over 50% of the work themselves. So typically a lot of these contractors will sub it out. The paving, we want them to make sure they are paving contractors and that they will do self-perform all the work. And lastly, as a proposal that is inconsistent or different from what we've done the last rounds, and based on the fact that, of Lisa's point, that we've increased capacity to accommodate emergency repairs and the things of that nature, we're proposing to increase the capacity from 1 million to 1.5 million for the A and B licenses to building capacity for unknowns. And again, this is in accordance with our policy and with the laws governing public contracting code. And so it is applicable, and that limit allows us to go up to $3+ million at this point in time. So we're just going to 1.5, but that is a different limit. One more reminder on that is that it's not budgeted money. All the budget has to be in a project. So this is just an amount, and what we're entering into in a contract is that amount as a limit. So we do have to offer a limit of minimum $50,000 of work. And at that point in time, we don't need to engage with the contractor. But fortunately, our experience with Jock thus far has been that we haven't had too many non-responsive contractors. With that, that summarizes this presentation. I will stop sharing and field any questions that the committee or others may have.
Thank you, Ren, and Lisa's back by phone if there are any questions. Director Corbett?
I could tell I was going to raise my hand because I was reaching for my...
I decided to interpret it thus.
Yes. So 2 questions, and maybe I'm just not familiar with this. So with the paving contractors, I know we do a lot of paving in-house, don't we? Don't we typically do all of our paving? Is that, do I have that right?
We have a roads and trails department that does a lot of paving, but as I said, the district owns a lot of pavement, and there is not enough time or manpower, to Director Rosario's point earlier, staff to do all the work that we need to do. So we spoke with MAST, and they asked for this, and they have used the capacity of this year for both and done all the work that they can possibly do themselves. So I believe it is a necessity for the district to just maintain the infrastructure that we have now.
Yeah, good to know. And paving maintenance is really important, because if you don't, it's a lot more expensive and a lot more involved.
Correct.
And have environmental consequences, et cetera, et cetera. So that's good. Just wanted to make sure on that, because it's my recollection that we do so much of our own paving, and we do a pretty good job. So then my other question is on the increase in the job contract limit upwards from 1 to 1.5 million for the A and B contracts. Is that because we're seeing a trend that our contracts, I mean, why are we lifting that number? What's the specific reason behind doing that?
So the specific reason is that in our experience anecdotally from the past 3 rounds is that we've pretty much reached capacity, and that's with a set work schedule. And what we learned in this last round is that the district has some emergency repairs that will come up, and job order contracting is an excellent way to address those repairs in a timely manner. And so to accommodate for that freeboard, if you will, or have a little more capacity, we're asking to increase that, because this last round we had to come back to the board and increase 2 contracts to do some of these projects that were deemed to be important, i.e. the waterproofing and the levee repair. So the district has lots of work to do. And so based on that, it's building in some capacity to do unaddressed or unscheduled improvements that need to be done for health, safety, and welfare of our users.
Okay, that sounds good. Do we have any particular emergency repairs you see on the horizon?
No, if I knew that, no, I do not.
You're anticipating. It's been such a great year. Why not?
But Director Corbett, I will say that even the FEMA work that we're continuing to do from the 2017 storms, we are utilizing some of these job contractors. So there could be winter storms or other things that you know, impact us in the future.
Yeah, why not? It's only 2020 and it's only October. Thank you. That's it for me.
Director Rosario.
All right, thank you. I just have a couple questions on a couple of projects. Is there a due date for completion for the bridges at Dry Creek?
There is, yes. We are working, those are constrained by environmental permitting because we were working above and in stream channels. I believe there was one done last year, and I believe we're working on 2 or 3 this year. I need to find out specifics on that. We're working on 2 this year, which would leave 3. Are we going to be done this year? We're going to be done this year. Sorry, it's not my project. I try to keep track of all of them, but we will be done this year. It has taken a couple of years, but that has been because of environmental permitting. So yeah, they will be done this year.
God, that's great. And then on the Tilden sediment basin dredge, is that Jewel Lake?
No, that is not Jewel Lake. The board went up and looked at, if you recall, 2 years ago when we did the ponds at the Tilden EC, when we went there, it's the sediment pond right below the little farm. So it's right at the bridge there. And that was dredged out and re-dredged to help with Jewel Lake though. So in other words, it captures the sediment. And after one season it filled in. So we're going back to do maintenance dredging on that. And the intent is to help Jewel Lake, but it is not dredging Jewel Lake. It's the sediment pond right below the little farm.
Okay. And then my last question is the topper slide in Lafayette Rugged Trail. Is that synonymous with the slide off of Augusta Drive, or is this another one?
No, I think that's different. I think the Augusta Drive one, I believe, is the one that's been there for a long time. Yeah, no, this is different.
Okay. Great. Thank you. That's it. That sounds like we're moving along. Thank you.
Yes, we are.
Ellen?
I lied, I have another question. Rind, can you tell us with the Contra Loma project that's almost completed, what was the solution for this issue with the sand and the scouring of the deck?
So the temporary solution was to just waterproof the lagoon. There's a larger study that has been done, which we'll be bringing to executive committee in the near future, that has looked at replacement of the sand. And so part of the proposal of that report was to re-waterproof while the district reconvened and figured out what a suitable replacement for the sand would be as a recreational value. So the resolution was to do the waterproofing that was recommended in that report as we figure out more. And so this waterproofing that was recommended as the material has a lifespan of 8 to 10 years. So we should be good, and there shouldn't be a similar problem for quite some time that'll give the district. And as I said, this report has some other alternatives for the sand. And so it gives the district time to assess those recommendations and maybe move forward, get funding and do that. But we should see that the waterproofing and the scouring should not have a negative impact for quite some time. As I understand, it's a little bit better material than the previous waterproofing and more sound. So it should be good. And that's the temporary fix for the sand.
That's really good to hear. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I'm done. Sorry, Colin.
No problem. So we'll move on. I do want to note that we're on agenda. We just completed agenda item number 4 of 11 items, and we're very much behind the estimated schedule here. Not that I'm suggesting moving along quicker or anything like that, but did want to make a note of that. So we'll move on. That was an information item. Next is also another information item. It is David Sumner's mid-year report on internal auditing.
Director Coffey, before you move on, I did see Meadow Darcy raise your hand, please.
Oh, sure. No problem. Let's go. Meadow, do you have a public comment to contribute at this point?
I do. Thank you. My name is Meadow Darcy. I am the Chief Steward for AFSCME Local 2428. Thank you, directors, for inviting me to do public comment. I'll make it really brief. I just wanted to thank Director Rosario earlier for his comments about staffing and the impact of staffing that has. And when it comes to JOC, I think one of the, when JOC initially was brought to the union, our concerns as always is that, work doesn't get contracted out on a regular basis. And not that I'm seeing that here today at all, but I do often hear on the JOC report, we just don't have the staff to do it. And so I just would hope that maybe the board could direct staff to maybe periodically make an evaluation of what contracts are repeated on a regular basis. So if we don't have enough capacity in paving, and that is something that's happening regularly, and we are continually contracting that out, that perhaps we could look at that and address that with, staff that are unionized and receive fair wages and those types of things and full benefits. So that's always our concern. And I know the district is also has a really great support of our unions. And so perhaps having something like that on a regular basis just to evaluate which contracts are coming up regularly and whether that justifies even economically hiring permanent staff to do that work. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Meadow. We've been told in the past that that is routinely done, that assessment of measuring how often we're going out of house and utilizing these funds versus doing it in-house, and whether we need to enhance in-house services. There's a constant evaluation of that. I've been told, if anyone from management wants to comment, otherwise we just move on. So I think I got that right. Good point, and good to bring it up and pursue it. Let me see, we are then at, as I began to introduce David on the mid-year internal audit report, unless someone else wants to introduce David, but there's David. We ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. David Sumner, Internal Audit Manager. So let me share, I'm sorry, hold on. Let me share my screen with you. And it's the one, right? So do you see the screen now? Hello? Do you see the screen?
Yes.
We sure do.
Thank you. Okay, so let me go to the next page. This is basically what I'm doing, or what we are doing. Internal Audit has 2 staff, and we reviewed 12 projects, completed 12 projects and 374 contracts for the first 7 months of the year. And there were 6 major WW audits, 2 from City of Oakland, 2 from City of Fremont, and 1 from Berkeley and 1 from El Cerrito. They had complied with the district requirements, and there's no issue with them. So they were approved for complete reimbursement. And then full scope audits that we performed are as follows. It was review of the Park Express. Park Express really demonstrates district's leadership foresight and care about the people that are residing in the area, and it's a very successful and popular program. We looked at it to make sure that the program objectives were met and financial activities had taken place properly. Fortunately, everything was fine. The only finding we had was, as described in the detailed report that was provided to you, there was a brochure that was guiding users basically that had been dated and had inconsistencies with what was expressed on the website. So suggested that that would be updated. The staff of operations department followed quickly. It was removed, and when it comes for update, it would be considered to be all-inclusive and provide the accurate information as it stands today. The next audit, full scope audit that we did was review of the Tilden Golf Course. It's a very successful concessionaire and has been with us since 1969. They were a public company that were taken to become a private company during the next audit. It has been audited 3 times, twice by us and once by a contractor that we had hired because we didn't have adequate staffing. I'm glad to report to you that they comply very well with the requirements. There were minor issues with them. And all in all, our finding was that because of some computer programming, they had not recognized the portions of revenue from a snack bar. It was not significant amount. It was a couple of $1,000s, and we noticed that and reported that, and operations department staff will be taking care of this. And because of the COVID-19 issues, it would be handled at the end of the year. Then there were some past due amounts and applicable interest that they are supposed to pay. We identified, obviously, the first portion that the snack bar revenues were not fully reported. So because of that, there is a rule in the agreement that we have with them that if there is any deficiency, they would have to pay $500 penalty plus 10% interest. So we calculated that it comes about to about 780 or so. And again, it would be discussed with them and will be taken care of by the end of the year. And then another issue that came up was they are required to provide a monthly receipt report to us. And it's part of the monitoring that district performs to make sure that revenues are reported timely and there is really no issue that would have to be looked at promptly. Regretfully, they had not complied with this. They had provided the year-end cumulative reports, but not the monthlies. And as we requested, they provided that. It did not have the signature of the authority that is supposed to send that. And we tallied those and tried to tie them back to the year-end report. There was some discrepancy, and reported that and included that in our calculation of the penalty and interest that they are owing. So next audit that we did was a review of the Tilden Park cash handling procedures. It's a huge park and the flagship of our district as far as park goes. And this review did not include the concessionaires that are operating them, and some reservation for the reservable facilities like Brazil room. But it included all the places that handle cash that is coming in. There was some issues with them, and basically they had not really adequately complied with the district policies and procedures. And it happened at the time that there was a different park supervisor there. And since then, the park supervisor has been transferred to another park, and Tilden Park has a new park supervisor. So we are hoping that it would be better. This was the third time, I believe, that we audited Tilden Park cash handling procedures. One of the issues that they had was there is a great deal of logistical requirement for cash handling, because at Lake Anza, they have this swim facility. We have this swim facility that they collect $2.50 from children and disabled people and $3.50 from the mature people. And what was happening is they would have to carry the money from office to the site. People are in line waiting to pay. Everything has to be calculated once or twice or three times because cash changes hand, and it really creates a problem. So our solution or recommendation to the board and to the department was to increase the fee for the adults to $4 and reduce the fee for the children and the disabled people to $2. And we calculated that at the end of the year, there is not going to be really much of a discrepancy as far as total revenue that district would be receiving. So I hope that this happens and it reduces the burden of handling cash, keeping track, keeping people to pay, having a lot of coins and money notes of different denominations on hand and so on, and it would be beneficial in our opinion. So this is what we are encouraging. There was a shortage of $100 in a starting change. The park supervisor of the time did not know what has happened. They were not keeping adequate records, regretfully, and it was not traceable. And excuse me. Fourth item that we had was cash bags were not picked up on time. And personally, and as a taxpayer, I'm really grateful for the police force that we have and appreciate that everything that they do, and they have not been really in the limelight for all these things that is happening and has tainted the public safety personnel and so on and so forth. And this cashback pickup is really an ancillary service that they are doing, and it's not the primary goal and mission of their activities. So they have a structured schedule that every place that has cash is going to be picked up once or twice the week throughout the year, depending on their level of activity, obviously. And we looked at the transactional activities that takes place. And in Tilden Park, there are times or months that the activity is greater and more severe and needs more frequent pickups. And there are times that the activities are slow and there are less cash picked up and so on and so forth. So we looked at it and suggested that operations department and public safety negotiate this and revise the schedule in a manner that relieves police force basically from going and visiting all the time and increases their activity during the time that they do need to go and pick up more cash frequently. And I believe that that would be done at a later time. And then the other thing that we reviewed was a review of Crown Beach concession that is operated by an entity called Board Sports or Board Sports California. It's a business that is having 3 locations, and I believe 2 of them are in our area, and one is belonging to the Park District or facility that Park District operates. They are very, very successful and very, very smart and diligent people with regard to running their business. But we noted that they have not really complied with the concession agreement requirement, financial provisions. And they were not really reporting everything that they have in a manner that is reviewable and documented and all that. They were required to have a separate bank account. They had not done that, claiming that cost of having separate bank accounts would be significant for their business. They did not have a financial system that is compliant with generally accepted accounting principles. They were using new technology to collect fees and so on. That was convenient for them and for their customers, but it was not conducive to maintaining adequate traceable records that district expects to make sure that the concessionaire is compliant, basically. And we suggested that they are coming up for renewal. We suggested that the district operations department enforces this requirement more diligently, and they have agreed to do so. And they have discussed it in detail with the Board Sports people, and hopefully they will be more compliant at the next run that we will do review our contract with them. And then we also noted that the concessionaire's remittances were often late, and because of that, we have to assess them a late charge, and regretfully, nobody had done so. So we again suggested to staff that they should be really looking at this and send them a bill when the time comes that they are not enforced, they were not compliant, and enforce it more rigorously. And then there was a posting mistake in the concessionaire maintenance fund. Fortunately, staff of finance department were diligent enough to recognize that at the year end, but because it constituted a account that was non-existent as a concession maintenance fund, we suggested that that would have to be considered, and finance department was responsive, and they will be arranging for more review of the maintenance fund contribution as the time goes by. The other audit that we did was review of the cash collection procedures at Kennedy Grove. It was the second time that we were auditing Kennedy Grove, and third time as far as providing advice as to how they should be handling cash. They were more compliant this year, and the only problem that they had was they had a part-time cashier that has not gone through the training for how to handle cash. At the end of the day, he would accumulate all the refunds that he had done and did not retain the receipts that were paid or initially generated, and make all of them as one posting to revise total cash that he has to have. And as such, it was not really compliant with the district requirement. So we brought this to the attention of operations department, and they were very willing to remediate this. And from now on, there would be training, hopefully through Summit, which is the training program of the district. And if a cashier or a kiosk attendant is not available to receive adequate training before the start of the season, then they can go and learn it from the recorded version and all that. And it was not a big issue. I also looked at the prior audit findings. Fortunately, the new supervisor in charge of the park is highly motivated and capable, and he had taken care of most of the problems that we had identified in our previous audit. I am at your service if you have any question.
All righty, Director Rosario.
Okay, am I muted? No, I'm ready. Thank you. David, thank you. You're always, I love your thoroughness in your reports. So this is one department where I'm always, ever since I've been on the finance committee, saying that this department, this portion, the audit department, is understaffed. And every time I hear one of these audits, and we consistently find problems. And I think if we had the ability to do more audits and follow up on some of the problem concessionaires and parks, we could be doing a much better job. And I appreciate the job that you are doing. So I totally, regarding the Tilden Golf Course recommendation, or the not the golf course, but the Tilden cash handling, I totally endorse the changing of the pricing, because I had to, just from my own experience, having to deal with change and having to go down, sending a park ranger down to the nearest, down the hill from Redwood to Safeway to get quarters was just a nightmare. And a total waste of resources. So I totally embrace that. And then I think we need to figure out some way to, for the supervisor to, because a park supervisor can't be at the kiosk to sign and look at all those refund vouchers. It's way too busy. There's got to be some way that he or she can delegate, or we can designate some kind of position that would oversee the kiosk operations at a particular part, especially till the Lake Kansas is so busy. Someone that's there closer to the swim center that's available for oversight of that operation. I don't know how I would do it. It's crazy. And then training of the personnel, the kids, or the young people that staff these kiosks. Oftentimes the training's at the very, I don't know how it is now, but in the past it was like at the beginning of the year, and sometimes some of these kids are hired after that training is done, and then there's no provision to get the training afterwards. So it's up to the supervisor and the park staffs to train them. And sometimes things get lost. So there needs to be some kind of a way that can get coordinated better. And I used to send my staff, my whole park ranger staff, because we all had responsibility for the kiosk on our own days. And we all went. And so that helps too. But sometimes you don't have that luxury. I mean, Tilden's a big park. They got eight rangers, and you can't possibly send everybody to that. But that's something I see as something we should look at. And then regarding pickups, I think in the summer, I mean, we should really, I mean, public safety is just jammed in the summertime.
Yeah.
Even now, with COVID, they had expressed some concerns about covering the campgrounds at night. So, I'm possibility of looking at doing money pickups, contracting that out. Brinks, I don't know.
Yeah, let me explain if I may, Your Honor. We are not really expecting the parks or park supervisor to go and approve every refund and all that. There is a $15 refund. If it's below $15, there will be no involvement. But beyond that, we request that there will be a supervisory review and not necessarily by park supervisor. He can assign someone that is directly not involved in cash collection himself. So that would be a cure, basically. And you're absolutely right with regard to the problems that is for cash handling by the public safety. We had looked at contracting out by armored services and things like that. They are very costly, and some of the parks that we do collect cash, they might not be willing to serve. So our suggestion, basically, off the top of my head, is that we should be authorizing some of the park employees that, again, themselves are not directly involved in cash handling, to carry the cash to the bank and deposit it, because it's a extra burden, if you will, on the public safety, and it hurts their primary mission from my point of view. So that would be a suggestion that needs to be evaluated by operations department and park supervisors and all that, and if they can come up with an agreement with it. This is really not going to be like this. If cash gets accumulated for whatever reason, and God forbid, one of the parks gets burglarized, or life of a person gets into the danger and all that, it would be more damaging than the current situation really considers. So I suggest that we consider these kind of things. You know, at my level and within my range of authority, I can only recommend, and it depends on what they want. With regard to adequate staffing and all that, I'm grateful for you and for all the board members and the leadership of the district that have been always considerate of adding to internal audit staff, because we are really short-handed, if you will. And as the technology changes, more challenges coming on our way as well. And miracles happen, we would have to work hard on it. So I hope that this year would be the year that the leadership of the district decides to increase the staffing.
Me too. And then regarding board sports, I mean, to me, it sounds like, why are we even dealing with these people if they're so uncooperative, especially with not providing their federal and state returns? That to me, it sounds like, you know,
it gets
not being cooperative at all.
So on and so forth. Basically controls break down further and further, and there is more need for audit, if you will. And I assure you that every penny that district spends on audit rewards the district more than 10 times, because it prevents things from going from a problem, from an issue to a problem, from a problem to a crisis, and becomes a legal issue, and so on and so forth. So all we have in our disposal is persuasion and bringing to light things that needs to be monitored further. I appreciate all the support and all the encouragement that the leadership of district has provided to internal audit. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I you know, so in the cases of like a vendor like board sports, that they need to be, if we choose to continue, I think they need to be monitored very, very closely. And I mean, if they can't, if they refuse to these simple little things that that we are dutifully have needed access to, then we shouldn't be dealing with them. So that's it for me. Thank you for so much. I really appreciate your thoroughness, and I think we need to be doing more, as I've said in the past. So thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dee. Director Corbett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. David, I also want to thank you. I always appreciate your report because you can tell that you look at every single little penny. You look under every stone, and it's always so complete. So I always enjoy your report as well. I do have a question I think I should direct towards either Deborah or Anna. And that is, do we do, every so often a review to see if we can move to cashless transactions? I know we do have limitations in some parks because of connectivity, but I don't know if that's the case at Tilden or De Anza, but it just seems, especially during COVID-19, since people are getting so used to not using cash, there's so much more contactless options. Do we ever look at that overall to see if maybe we could make some of these situations cashless so we don't have to worry about bag pickups and such?
Well, yeah, the nature of coming to parks is a little bit tough, but we have been implementing where we can, where we have connectivity to have point of sale. I think there's 5 locations, kiosks that have point of sale, some of the bigger ones. And then also finance and business services are working together to try to come up with new technologies that could allow less contact. So we are looking at that. And, there's another item on the agenda that talks about how we are allowing for other types of payment besides checks and cash and things like that. So we're continuing to explore that. I think, just so you know, one of the first steps for having, no cash box or no register, having more electronic, is getting the connectivity. So IS really has spent a lot of time trying to get the parks connected. So that's the first step.
Yeah, I know that's an issue some places, but it just seems like it could help streamline things, and with some of the applications that are available, make David's job easier too. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Corbett. I appreciate all the visionary views that you present and all the support you have provided to us as a finance staff. I'm grateful for your diligence in reviewing things as well. You're really impressive. I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, David. Tiffany.
Thank you,
Hi,
sir.
everyone. Good afternoon, Business Services Manager Tiffany Margolisi, and thank you so much to David and his team. As has been pointed out, he's really diligent in looking at every aspect of the audit, and it's always a learning experience. My first audit that I had here at the district was when I was in reservation supervisor, was done by David and his team, and you always learn something new. So I wanted I'll provide a few brief updates. One is we really support the idea of eliminating the 50-cent fees. And so the Board Operations Committee will see that proposal coming at the October Board Operations Committee. We're ready to implement that, and staff was really excited. So we thank you for that proposal. Regarding the frontline training, we are in discussions with finance and human resources as to how to use our Summit learning management system from HR to do some of the trainings online, so that as kiosk staff come on throughout the season, they don't all have to leave the park in one day and attend in person. And I also wanted to compliment our accounting manager, Kim Billingett, and her team, who have really implemented an on-site training for cash handling. And I think that their feedback has been that having an on-site training is also really helpful, rather than trying to send everyone to a central training. And then just the last comment that I'll make is just really trying to reduce some of the root cause of refunds needed also. So we're discussing ways that we can look at the common patterns for reasons things might be refunded, and see if we can address those. And likewise, really looking to go cashless. It's really improves the experience for everyone. And with our point of sale sites after the first of the year, we expect to have new types of card readers available that will enable the tap, possibly enable the Google Pay and Apple Pay. So we just have to work through some of those options to make sure they work for audit, finance, operations. But we're really looking at that, and that could eliminate some of these logistical problems altogether. So thank you again to David for the review.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. That's helpful. So if we are ready, the next item is item 6. Before we go there, I've been doing a little chatting with Deborah Ocker about our time issues here. We're going to go well over the estimated time for conclusion of the meeting. So a couple of issues. Do members of the committee and others want to take a 5-minute break with the understanding that we're going? I see one yes, and he counts. So that we'll go ahead. What, 5 or 10 minutes?
Yeah.
And Director Coffey, before we go on official break, I'd just like to go on the record and say there's no public comments for this item.
All righty, thank you. So 5 minutes, let's try to get back. Deborah also suggests that items, let me know if I'm wrong, 9 and 10, the Bank of the West presentation and the Green Bond Annual Report, which is actually very interesting, nonetheless, could be reduced to submission on what has been presented and questions, maybe responses to any questions committee members have, so those could get through quickly. But if the committee wants full presentations on both those items, obviously we can ask for the same. But with those thoughts, let's go ahead to a 5-minute break. So about 3:21 we'll come back. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I do have a 4 o'clock appointment by phone, so just wanted to let you know that.
Okay, then we will make a note of that and confer with you before you have to drop off, see where we are, okay?
Thank you so much.
Please interrupt if we're in the middle of something. Just we'll want to take care of that issue that you have there.
Thank you so much.
So let me figure out where we were. We were with the Beacon Economics property tax forecast, and that's going to be Deborah Spalding presenting, and we have one public speaker request. So Deborah.
Oopsie. Hi there, Deborah Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer, and I am bringing up my screen so I can share it with you. All right, can you see this okay?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, so this is
not quite. I'm sorry. I'm seeing my own.
Try sharing one more time.
Okay. Take 2. Share screen. All right.
There we go. Yep.
Got it.
Okay. So this is an annual report that we bring to you to help you prepare for the upcoming budget. Beacon Economics is a well-regarded firm, and they've been working for us since 2009. And they provide a five-year projection for us to look forward at assessed value in the future. So here is a bit more history. As I mentioned, we've been working with them since 2009, right after Measure WW was passed. And at the time, assessed values had really collapsed. And there was a lot of concern about how we were going to continue to keep our bond rate below that $10 per $100,000 of assessed value. And this was their original forecast. So even though things are bad now, you can see that it was a lot worse back then. So if that's and here are some highlights from their forecast for this year. So, and I put all this in quotes because yeah, I want to be sure to attribute it to Beacon. So they are rather optimistic compared to some. So they're saying that they believe this will be a sharp but short recession because the shock that set off the crisis has none of the long-term characteristics that would cause a protracted recovery. That's at the federal level. At the state level, they did identify that there has been an increase in people calling their layoffs permanent versus temporary unemployment. And so they say that's worrying. But since they're doing a property tax projection, really the main thing they're looking at for us is assessed value. And at the local 2-county level, they're saying that it looks like the housing market so far has really done fine, escaped the pandemic relatively unscathed. On the flip side, and we talked about this a bit earlier, on the side of office real estate and business real estate, they're saying telecommuting could potentially have a long-term impact on assessed values in this area. And so here are 2 forecasts that they gave us from last year and from this year. And so the purple line is last year's forecast. And you can see this year's they're giving us a steep dip in our assessed value, but then recovering to actually be higher than what their previous forecast was in the outlying years. And it's important to note their midline forecast. And the reason I say that is, and I'll talk about this on the next slide. So they give us 3 forecasts: low, baseline, and high. And typically we use their baseline forecast for assessed value. And what we do is we take that forecast and we combine it with the known assessed value that we've already received from the 2 counties, because the counties are on a fiscal year and we're on a calendar year. So we only know for sure what our increase will be for the first half of the year. So we typically take Beacon's baseline projection and we combine it with our known amount from the 2 counties to get our forecast for the whole year. This year, we actually are going to use the low forecast because we want to be extra careful. And if it does end up that the baseline is the more accurate forecast, then we would end up with revenues above expectation at the end of the year. And that those funds would be available for mid-year appropriation. And I think this is the last slide, just showing you the 3 different forecasts that they have provided for us in the 2 counties. So the low forecast, the very first line is the one that we're going to use. And the combined 2 counties is 2.4% growth rate. Now, if we were using the baseline, that would be almost a percentage and a half, it is a percentage and a half above 3.9%. And then the high forecast, you can see, interestingly, bumps up Contra Costa County to have higher growth than Alameda County. And I believe that is the last slide. This is an informational item, but we could take any comments or questions.
Questions from the committee, Director Rosario.
Yeah, in that forecast per county, how much of that is district funds? I mean,
so the forecast for assessed value.
Yes.
So because we cover such a huge area, and within the 2 counties, there are literally hundreds of different tax rate areas. And so in each one, we get a different percent of the 1%. So in some areas, we get more of that 1% than others. And so that's the overall increase that they're saying we will get for, globally. They do kind of macro analysis. They're not looking at the micro level. So they're saying the increase for, the low increase for the 2 counties is going to be that 2.4%. We take what we have of the known amount and apply that 2.4% increase to say, okay, this is the increment we'll receive.
Okay, great, thank you.
So the chart you showed us represented for each county the entire property tax pie. In other words, the total property taxes those counties are estimating will be received. And then of that total pie, we receive a little slice of it in each county.
That's right. I'm going to go back and share that since.
Yeah, that is correct, Director Coffey. The assessed valuation is all the residential, commercial, industrial property, all the property that is subject to assessed valuation and taxation. And then we get a slice, shared with the county, the schools, the other special districts, the cities. That's correct.
All right. Director Corbett?
Just wanted to make a quick note of some happy news in the report, that if Prop 15 passes, the Park District will get some great new revenue from that. So happy to see that.
Okay. Does that do it for committee questions? Can we move to Kelly's comment at this point? Caitlin?
Yes, he is the only public speaker, Mr. Brew.
Go ahead, Kelly.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, I'll start with the beginning. This number that we're talking about is a keystone number. It's the revenue, and the district gets a lot of, depends very much. It's heavily dependent on this particular number. And then, so when you look at the number, for example, for that total revenues for each county, there's a whole lot of over precision in that number. That's at the top of the chart, it says that's a forecast. And you're forecasting out to the nearest dollar. That's a little ridiculous. What you should do is perhaps figure out how many of those numbers you actually need to convey the information that you're trying to convey. and then convert the rest of the numbers to be zero. So, for example, $589 million or billion dollars, whatever it is. Going over this forecast, let's look at the timing of this forecast. Last year, the Beacon Economics issued its forecast in August of 2019. Here we are on the last day of September 2020. With last year, there was no pandemic. This year, we're finally getting around on the last day of September to looking at a critical number on which the health of your district depends. And here we are, just opening the box. Well, maybe you've been following this all along in the closets, in the back smoke-filled back rooms. But you know, now this number is reaching the light of day, and it's not that the number is bad; it's the timing is a little unusual. If this number is so important, and it is, I assure you it is, it should be looked at, and it should be looked at. Should have been pulled in earlier. And then when you post the notice for this meeting, which should be posted 72 hours in advance. Well, it wasn't. But there's a thing called breezeway posting. Here we are. We're not even holding a meeting. This is a teleconference, right? And we've, due to a pandemic, we've had radical changes in the arrangements of all these meetings. But somehow, and no one expects the directors to go drive to Oakland and walk into a breezeway and look at the wall and figure out what's on the agenda. But that's what you're expecting for the public to do, because you still rely as a legal basis. Your ultimate fallback is breezeway posting during a pandemic when your headquarters site is closed. It's actually physically closed. It's actually closed on your agenda. You say our headquarters is closed for the pandemic, but you want the members of the public to go there and read the paper on your breezeway. Not only this is it's almost a parody or a charade or a farce, breezeway posting. Then we can get into the reporting itself, the accuracy of the reporting. I won't get too deep into that, but we did find some problems with accuracy. Once I got around to looking at the numbers, they jumped out at me, and they've been corrected in the report. So I won't get into that. And now on the operating scenario chart, you know, that scenario chart, it needs to be talking about what the numbers you're actually using, the 2.4% or whatever it is, not the mid-range forecast. So when you put up a chart that shows you what forecasts are, you should actually be showing the chart that shows what numbers you're operating, what is your operating scenario, what is your operating forecast. And that's not in the first chart. That line chart with the dip, if you put in a 2.4%, that dip is twice as deep. And then, so that's every step along the way. What you need to be thinking about is, who are our customers? What are their needs? What are the expectations? And not just how can we meet the bare minimum of reporting and legal requirements. You need to be thinking about how can we, you know, at least meet the expectations and maybe exceed them. And that's not happened. And then finally, here we are. The report is out, and we're now at the place that Director Coffey told me some months back that he didn't want to be looking at. The question is, what are we supposed to do with these numbers? How are we supposed to respond? And how are we supposed to adjust? And that's the most difficult question. And that's why you guys get elected. And that's what you have to deal with now. That's what Director Coffey was afraid of, dealing with this questions. And I will put them all in your lap and ask you to please figure out how to respond and adjust. That's what you get paid those big bucks for, and those annual fees that you get on the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Briefly, Deborah.
Thank you, Director Coffey, and thank you to Mr. Abreu, our public speaker. He has been very diligent in working with us and watching over our property tax revenue, which is one of the most important revenues. He is speaking of an error that we made in posting the agenda, and so I apologize for that. We had a delay in getting our agenda for this meeting posted onto the website, and he pointed that out to us and we quickly corrected it, but it was posted in the breezeway. And yes, I agree that this is a lot of information. Typically, the district has provided basically the raw data that comes from our consultant so that we can absorb that. And that at our next meeting, when we start digging into our budget, which is a budget starting for January of 2020, we work with the board and talk about what all these numbers mean. So I agree, there is more to come. There's more analysis of this data, and we will be bringing that forward. Thank you.
Okay, let's move to item 7, tax levy for general obligation bond debt service and assessed valuation update. That will be Deborah Spalding, another information item.
Hey, so again, this is an annual item, and we're returning to you after having brought this to the board of directors in July to get authority to authorize the tax levy itself. And we say we'll come back to the finance committee with the actual data once the counties provide us with the AV amounts. And so to put it in context, last year's levy was $6 in Alameda County per $100,000 of assessed valuation, and $9.40 per 100,000 of AV in Contra Costa County. And that was due to an error that was made in the previous year by Contra Costa County. And that has now been resolved. So we have now just a single rate for both counties. And it is much lower this year. I'm sure everybody's glad to see that, $1.40 per $100,000 of assessed valuation. And that is just related to the amount of debt service that we have due in the coming year. And we will be continuing to maintain our tax levy at that rate that was promised to voters of below $10 per 100,000 of AV. And to give you a little more context, so the impact to the average household, and per Zillow, the median home value in Alameda County is $890,000. And so that would be $12.46. And in Contra Costa County, the median home value is a little bit lower, so that tax levy would be slightly lower, $10.23. And this is just an informational item. No action is required.
All right, questions from the committee. First, let's hear from Deborah.
I'll just add, or maybe repeat what Deborah said. The reason why the tax dropped is because the principal payment in 2020 was about 22 million, and the principal payment in 21 is 8 million. And we designed that. When we issue our bonds, we try to make sure that we make room for the next bond issue to come in. And originally, when we designed this debt service table, we said, hey, in 2021, we're probably going to issue more bonds. And so it's ready for that, to have another layer of debt service. And it's just built in. That's kind of the way we planned it. And so as we come back, we'll be coming back to you in the late summer of 2021 to issue an additional staunch of WW bonds. And then that will again shift that tax levy up a little bit because the requirements will be higher. So that's all I wanted to say.
Right, that's how it works. Director Corbett, any questions? Director Rosario?
No questions. I think it's
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the update. Item 8, I'll assume no public comment on item 7. I haven't heard of it.
That's correct, Chair Coffey.
Thank you, Caitlin. Item 8, unfunded costs and long-term liabilities facing the Park District. That brings with it lots of trepidation, Deborah Ocker. So keep the smile on your face as you describe these unfunded costs and long-term liabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Coffey. I know it's late, And I think you can tell we are ramping you up and gearing you up for the annual budget for, looking to put all of these pieces together. And so today, really, this is just an introduction and a reminder of what we have going on currently at the Park District and what we're facing. So here, just to start us off, people do understand what long-term debt is. As we just talked about, it's our WW bonds. And we are fortunate here that the voters approved the WW bonds, and they said they were willing to pay additional taxes to pay for those capital acquisitions and improvements to our parks. So the current outstanding balance as of our most recent annual financial report at December 31st is 158 million, and they're paid for out of special tax levy revenue. We also have promissory notes that were issued in 2012. Those are not paid for out of a special tax. Those are paid for out of general fund monies. And we've been utilizing those on making improvements to district facilities, lots of service yard improvements, equipment shop improvements, and of course, purchasing the Peralta Oaks North building with those funds. We still have some outstanding debt, and it's about 1.4 million out of general fund money every year that we set aside for that. Next slide. Then there's something we call unfunded liabilities. So that was actual debt that's on our books. Now these are unfunded liabilities. They're obligations, commitments that the district has made and has to pay for out into the future. And the one that everybody knows about is pensions. And nowadays, pensions are actually recorded on about 20 pages in our annual financial report. Hopefully you don't take the time to read that. But anyways, we have it all recorded in there. These numbers are as of December 31st. If you compare it to the PARS numbers that were reported earlier today, those are June 30th. So they're a little bit different. But our total outstanding unfunded liability at December 31st was 137 million. And that's made up of the PERS plans for miscellaneous, which are non-safety, and the old closed Park District retirement plans. The safety plans that are for sworn officers and sworn fire personnel. And then we also have the retiree medical program. And so all of that is added together, and we are contributing more than just the minimum requirement, as we talked about before. We're setting aside, we're definitely paying the minimum required actuarial amounts, but we're also setting aside additional funds for those. And we have the two trust funds, the OPEB trust and the PARS trust that we talked about today. And so those payments will go out into the future, and they're all paid for with general fund monies. Next slide. Then this is the most exciting slide. This is where the Park District, the directors, the former general managers have said, hey, there's a lot of other stuff out there that we need to take care of and manage. And the board of directors has put into place policies or practices to fund these that we have identified that are needs to the district. And so one of them is the Major Infrastructure Renovation and Replacement Fund, which was identified several years ago, I think at the end of the last, the Great Recession. And even just this last year, the Finance Committee and the Board of Directors adopted a funding policy, really putting all of those steps into play, where first we said, well, what does this mean? We have a lot of structures, bridges, utilities that are going to need renovation or replacement over time. And so we want to set money aside for that. And also our paved roads and trails. We talked a little bit about that today. We're setting money aside so that when, as time comes up, we have the funds available to provide for those improvements. And so it's really exciting that we have really kind of completed that program. Now we just have to do the work, right? The fuels management program, you're very familiar with, the board has made it a priority to go after lots of grant money to make sure that we have the correct permits, environmental permits, and setting aside millions of dollars in general funds in order to manage our forests. And so, this year's budget and next year's budget have we've consistently been increasing the amount of general funds that go towards this program. Measure CC had over $10 million out of the total 15-year authorization towards fuels management, and Measure FF contributes over $500,000 annually to the program. So that's another real success story. The thing with the difference between this and the infrastructure fund is that the infrastructure fund, we have gone through and done an assessment of our assets and of our paved roads and trails to come up with, well, what is the replacement cost of those and how much do you really need to set aside? What is your funding strategy? Whereas with the fuels management, we haven't gotten far enough to be able to say how much is it going to cost to get through all of our initial entry projects and have ongoing maintenance. So we're continuing to work on that now that we're, I think, in the 3rd year of having our full FEMA environmental permits. We're gathering that data and we'll be able to come up with future needs numbers for that. Another area I'm not sure you're familiar with is we set aside $500,000 annually for improvements for access to make sure that we have ADA compliant park access. And so we draw on that. The Mass department uses those funds a lot whenever they're putting in projects, and we put in new restrooms and we make sure the sidewalks and the access are following the right rules. And then here, this next item, opening new parks, right? This is what we kind of call our pipeline. So the master plan says we're not going to open new parks and facilities unless we properly staff it. And that includes operational costs. And so we do, when we're putting together our 5-year plans and we're putting together our budgets, we prioritize making sure that any new park openings, new facilities have staffing available before we open them up to the public. And that can average, it fluctuates based on what we're able to open, but we put sometimes an average of around 2 to 3 million in there for those types of activities, and the board is committed to that. And then also the commitments that we make to our employees, that we budget for 100% of our authorized positions. As we talked about the other day, we may have kind of had a slowdown in recruitments, but we really make it a priority to keep our authorized positions fully budgeted. And so those are all things that are known, that the board has repeatedly talked about. And as we build our budgets, we really, we keep these on the top of the list. So now we get into some other areas that we have definitely talked about, but they are not, these programs have not been established over time, and we still have some work to do. So this is where I really want some input from the board members. And, we've been talking a lot about our unpaved trail system, and we have identified that there is, lots of long-term maintenance required for our unpaved trail system. And we have on our list of to-dos to inventory that. And also in this year's budget, for the first time, we put in a small trails crew in order to help us maintain our unpaved trails. That's been very successful, using the SCA crews to help work on that. And we're looking to try to expand that to have a second crew in the next year's budget. We see a great need for that. And we have some work to do to figure out, how much deferred maintenance do we have in that area. Also, we've talked about our aquatic facilities. So Robert's Pool has been on our list of discussions lately. We're doing some maintenance out at the Contra Loma Lagoon. And we certainly know that Don Castro and Coal Canyon are going to need some renovation coming up in the near future. So I think at mid-year, we were able to put aside some funds in order to really say, we need to address that. We need to get an inventory and some future plans for what that looks like. And so that's not something that we've fully vetted or costed out yet. Another area that we haven't really talked about as a category, but Staff is trying to put this together as a category called maybe something like natural infrastructure, right? Some of the ecological things that are going on in our parks that need our attention. So we've talked about dredging, you know, we've talked about erosion control and the work on creeks and ponds. Those are outside of our major maintenance inventory. Those are not considered structures or utilities based on that category that we had put together to fund. This is different. This is natural infrastructure, and we know there's a lot of needs there, and we're starting to do some feasibility studies and put together some plans for that. Of course, shoreline restoration, preserving and maintaining cultural resources, you know, just kind of talking about our archive program at the very highest level, and there's so much more involved in that. Another area that the ASD and planning department has been working on, and we talked a little bit about the HCP today, is the conservation lands that the district holds. And along with being the holder of conservation lands, there are a lot of requirements. We have to do reporting, and we have to you know, do certain monitoring and maybe draw on other people's money if there's endowments out there. And so, you know, just really making sure that we have a good understanding of what are our obligations to our conservation lands, and are we meeting that on a regular basis. A lot of these things, agencies do pay as you go, right? We make sure we meet our obligations, we pay as we go, but we're not looking at the long-term needs or the long-term obligations and saying, well, over the next 10 years, this is how much we need for these types of management responsibilities. And then our wildlife, we talk about how can we help support our you know, our trees from different problems that come up, our animals from different problems that come up, a lot of them having to do with climate change. You know, how do we have money set aside for those protections? And then we've certainly talked a lot about alternative energy solutions and solar panels, and how can we, you know, be a district that utilizes those things. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes of this item. And I just want to hear from the board if there's any areas that resonate with you, or if you want us to explore a lot more details in. My goal is, as we come forth with our 5-year plan, that there are layers of these types of commitments and obligations that we can show that we do need to start setting additional funds aside to address these needs. So if you want to drop the slide down, that concludes my presentation.
Director Rosario.
Yeah, thank you. This is great, a great opportunity too. One of the things I was thinking of, I think all of those additional commitments that I thought they're all deserving, and but I wanted to add one more for discussion. And you know, after our last class and comp study, our employees are still averaging 9% behind median. And I was wondering, just for discussion purposes too, I would like to propose that we set up a fund for equity adjustments. You know, set aside some money annually every year, and then we would make equity adjustments throughout the park district with that money on an annual basis. Because personally, I think it's inherently unfair for ASME 2428 to bargain for these equity adjustments when it really is a park district concern. And so I think this would help alleviate some of that burden. And also regarding these other additional commitments, we get a little bit of interest from our reserve. And I was thinking, we have $298 million in unrestricted reserve. Why can't we use some of that money, the interest money, to provide some of these other commitments with seed money? You on an annual basis. You know, break that money up, that interest money, and put it into these different categories. And then, and I think that would be a good start. So just just off the top of my head. But like I said, I mean, dredging is huge, as I have a special concern with Lake Temescal, and then we have Jewel Lake as well. So, which is going to take a lot of money. But that was just off top of my head, just a possibility of using some of our interest money from our reserve to seed those extra projects, and we'll leave it up for discussion.
Director Rosario.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes before 4. Director Corbett, did you want to address this and maybe before signing off?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much. So yes, appreciate this is a really great list. And well, first I would say, and I mentioned this earlier in the meeting, I'm really looking forward to that point in time as we start to discuss this budget and also planning for budgets in the future, where we have some very serious conversations about, resources and where we're going to find funding to continue to do our mission. And we have challenges, natural challenges. Mother Nature gives us challenges, even though we take care of her very well. But in any event, I'm looking forward to that opportunity to really sink our teeth into a very serious discussion about our finances into the future, because I am seriously concerned, and it's time to start doing some planning. But on that very same note, these all look like great things for us to find resources for. And I will just mention, I'll call out a few of them. Obviously, the renovation of our swim and aquatic facilities is extremely important. We've talked about that quite a bit. So that's nothing new. I'm particularly interested in shoreline restoration and shoreline sustainability, just in the natural, but also because the 4th Ward contains, a large area of shoreline, and we do have to look forward to what we do to deal with the impacts of climate change and bay rise, et cetera, and how we preserve our trails and any infrastructure in that area. So obviously shoreline sustainability is big. With regard to mitigation and monitoring on conservation lands and wildlife and resource protection, I do really feel that that's a very important part of our mission, stewardship. And so I'm really big on wrapping stewardship into just about everything we do. So thank you for having those there. With regard to alternative energy solutions and using green alternatives to everything we do, I'm of course very supportive of that. But I also think that it makes practical sense in some of our more outlying areas to look into these standalone energy opportunities, so that we don't have to spend extra money on infrastructure and power poles and digging underground and such things. So if we have remote abilities to develop energy out in some of our more remote areas, I really think we need to look at that. I think it's not just an environmental issue, but I honestly think it's a technology that will provide us some savings and will be good for the environment as well. I think you always need to think about those things when you're building infrastructure, what the environmental costs are, as well as the actual costs. So, and then the other thing, which is something we already do, always really important to me to ensure we continue to allow for access to our parks. Accessibility, hugely important for all the communities we serve. And I touched on that a little earlier, whether that's actual transportation or other ways to deliver environmental education and environmental opportunities to all our communities. And honestly, during COVID-19, the fact that we have moved to an online platform, I think that creates many, many opportunities into the future as well, to be able to provide those services in an easily accessible way. There's nothing like being at the park itself, but also providing resources online are important for education. And then the last one is we recently passed a resolution denouncing racism and really recommitting to the goals of equity and inclusion, diversity, accountability. And I would like to make sure that we continue to take a look at that in our future funding goals and address those issues that were part of the resolution adopted by the board. So to just make sure we continue to make sure we take care of those issues as well, or put some efforts behind those issues. So that's my long list. I've now spent all the money we don't have, but I'm also willing to roll up my sleeves and try to find out ways that we can continue to find those resources we need. So thanks.
Thank you, Director Corbett.
Thank you, Director Corbett. So from the profound to the mundane, I specialize in mundane, I think, and this is my issue. I understand the process by which we're doing several layers of budgeting. Every year we budget per line item. And then this particular topic is budgeting, if we can, to the extent it's a priority, future expenditures that we know will occur. It makes perfect sense to me that if we know a bridge is going to fall down possibly in 10 years, and there's going to be X amount of money incurred to replace it, and we pretty much have to do that, it doesn't hurt to start putting away money in as a line item in this year's budget toward that 10-year obligation to replace that bridge. That strikes me as this long-term liability budgeting. I'm also aware that we have 5-year capital budgets that we see in that big thick book of capital projects that in fact are projected out beyond 5 years. I noted projects like the Iron Horse Trail expansion to the Benicia Bridge has actually been projected out as 20, 25 years, from $15 to $30 million in projected costs. And I don't think, since that's fairly fluid, that we actually put anything aside and budget for that beyond what we budget for our current capital expenditures under our capital budgets. So we have these layers of budgeting that we do, and here's where it's sort of mundane for me, and I need to learn some accounting, budgeting here that I'm just not adept at yet. And that is, the bridge example is easy for me, but I can go through a whole bunch of these yearly line items and know we're going to have future expenditures for them. I know, for instance, that we do project increases in workforce salaries, and in our budgets we project increases that we haven't necessarily allocated yet. In any event, I'm not adept yet at figuring out what items to put into what category of long-term funding versus short-term budget. And again, the example of the bridge that's going to fall down eventually is easy for me. Those that are maybe less concrete as that in terms of timelines and happening are less clear to me. On a lot of those on this list that you've just presented seem to me to be good ideas, things we're going to know, but they're less concrete than the infrastructure funding that we already do for long-term infrastructure. So I would have to figure out how you make that list in the first place when you have a long list of line items for every annual budget. And maybe we can talk offline about that sometime, or follow up on it in some way, because I that's the help I would need.
And Director Coffey, that's exactly why I don't have any dollars next to any of those items, because they are really significant, you know, things that the Park District, it's part of our mission to manage all of these lands, and figuring out how to project the cost is, you know, it's something we work on, right? We have a dredging study for Lake Temescal. We're working on a feasibility study for Jewel Lake. We are doing analysis on our bridges with our internal civil engineers. So all of those things, we're gathering data and figuring out how to pull it together, right, and prioritize it, so that we're not always, you know, the saying of you're putting out fires, right? You don't want to always be reacting to the things that are breaking. You want to be able to plan for repairing and replacement in a you know, advanced way.
But it's not, for me, it's not so much putting numbers next to it. That's your job. It's prioritizing. You know, again, I can prioritize long-term funding for that bridge I know is going to fall down, but the land management issues that we know are going to exist and know there are going to be dollars there, I don't know whether that is something that's best addressed on an annual basis through the line item for that expenditure, or, you know, projecting 5 years out and making it a priority for setting aside funds. So that's where it's the prioritization that I have difficulty putting together in my own mind. Ellen?
I think that's a fabulous idea, Colin, figuring that out. I just want to make a pitch. You made me think of this. I don't know if we have a climate action planning fund or some way where I mean, it's like your bridge example. We know we're going to have inundation in some areas. We know we have to continue to deal with the wildland interface and be concerned about wildfires. So there's a whole number of things that are kind of like the bridge falling down, but they're with us because of climate change. So I don't know if we have this, but I think it would be nice to start doing some planning, if we don't have it already, some sort of climate action plan that has associated with it putting dollars aside, because we know these are things we're going to have to deal with and fund. Some we do now already, naturally, but I really think we should have some more specific directed planning around it for revenue to address climate change issues. And Deborah, I don't know, maybe we have some sort of pot of money for that. I don't know, but I think it needs to be something that we plan for in the future. It's just like a bridge falling down. We know it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And I believe the planning department is involved in these regional vulnerability assessments.
Yes.
And they'll be bringing that information forward as they get some of that. And I know in public affairs, we are continuing to support and seek any of this green money that's out there, right, for the climate bond and for things like that. And as we gather our projects, prioritize them on our side and say, this is what we want to do, then we can go after that kind of grant money and bond money that hopefully will be coming forth.
Do we have a place where we're planning for this on our bottom line, funding wise, as opposed to project by project? Is that something that could make sense?
Well, I think having this starting conversation for these items that we haven't really put into our budget, except for when the fires come up and we identify things. Right. I think that's starting that conversation to put together that matrix so we can look at, you know, a larger view of what's out there and then allow the board to prioritize those.
Yeah, because it's an infrastructure issue as well. We just don't think about it as much as we do about a bridge falling down, but it is something we know is coming. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, so we're good. I want it known that I am resisting responding to my colleagues' suggestions of making fun of me for my interest in bridges. I only note that they are Alameda-based people, and So I do have a bias toward bridges out in Ward 7. Okay, I responded. Never mind. How about the suggestion from Deborah that items 9 and 10 can be submitted and subject to questioning as opposed to presentations? What's the pleasure of the board, the committee?
I'm fine either way. I'm actually going to have to drop off.
I know.
So
Okay.
whatever you guys want to do,
I think
I'll catch up with you.
Yeah, summary is fine.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Great meeting.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
So item 9 is Bank of the West online cash receipts. It's Michelle, if a brief summary would do for us. I hear you. We need her unmuted.
Sorry, Michelle, you're on mute. Can you try to undo that? She's being very quick, though.
I apologize. Yes.
There you go.
Thank you for that presentation. Now.
Michelle Strassner, Assistant Finance Officer. I don't have a specific PowerPoint for you today, so it will be a very brief update on a new online payment service we're offering to our customers. Finance is in the process of implementing an online banking portal with Bank of the West, which will allow our customers to make electronic ACH payments to the Park District. And this service will allow for a variety of payments, such as concessionaire fees, encroachment permits, and as well as retiree medical invoices. This payment method will allow for real-time secure payments to be made without the delays of mail service and check processing, which is important, especially now during the COVID pandemic. And this service will be free to our customers paying with ACH, and we expect it to be operational within the next couple of weeks.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. So unless anyone has any questions, that concludes my presentation.
That's good.
With that, would these payments include our vendors and our concessionaires making payments to the Park District?
Yes, concessionaire payments will be accepted as well, and yeah, and we're gonna continue building on it. We're kind of rolling it out gradually. So initially, we're just offering ACH payments, but in the future, we'll be considering credit card payments.
Great.
Thank you, Michelle. I have nothing to add, and if there's no public comment, let's move on. So I am a little reluctant to just pass off on the green bond funding report because it's fascinating. We have a decent slide presentation here, very interesting issues and results, and I'm wondering, Deborah Ocker, if we might just put this over on another agenda that isn't so busy. It doesn't seem to be anything with deadlines.
It is not urgent, and we're happy to put it on the next agenda. I can't promise the next agenda is going to be too short, but
yeah, that's the issue, and why I hesitate. But Director Corbett had to take off. A lot of people with meetings have had to take off, and it's frankly, it's an issue as an elected board member that I like bringing publicity to, and I'm sure Director Rosario agrees. It's something we're proud of, and the impact we made on that industry, that we were actually among the first who were actually, there was data that suggested it worked. And that kind of early indicator is a leader in the industry. So I'd like to actually get more attention to this and put it over if we could.
Sure, no problem. We'll do it next time.
Dee, does that sound?
That sounds great.
Right, yeah. I think it's worthy. So now that I have taken off the agenda, we will move that on. Public comment on items, general items, maybe not on the agenda.
There's no additional public comments, Director Coffey.
Okay.
Committee, can I move to committee comments? I have none. Director Rosario.
No, other than Deborah, thank you once again. You continue to earn the moniker of the naturalist of the finance department. So Yeah, I think this was great. I just love how things are just are easy to read, and I actually didn't mind looking at my packet online. It seemed to work for me. So if anybody else doesn't mind getting it that way, it would save some paper.
Yeah, I have to admit that I'm a bit slower in moving the meeting along because I have to switch from screens.
Yeah, that's my only thing. Wish I
Yeah,
could split.
yeah, and I don't want to get into my eyesight and stuff like that with too into details. But yeah, I think at least from chairing, I would do well to have the paper in front of me and all.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But
I find that doing the budget, it is nice to be able to make notes on the paper and things like that. But certainly after we get through the budget, maybe we'll check in with the board members and see if electronic versions are, you know, okay with them.
Yeah, you know, I've learned how to highlight in a PDF, but I don't have that pen capability of writing on it and making notes on it like I do in the hard copy. And and that's true. As I will read through the hard copy, I make notes next to it, and I can't do that in a PDF. I know I can. I just haven't learned how to do it with a stylus. And,
well, you can use the comment button too. You can add little tags.
Yeah.
Type it in.
Bubbles.
Yeah.
And one nice additional thing, thank you for bringing that up, Director Rosario, is then you can print with comments. So then those comments will be available later for reference.
Oh, I didn't realize you could do that.
oh, and I'm going to organize your comments.
Yeah.
I've seen that done.
Print with, I'll have to remember that. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you all for the presentations tonight and all the effort and work that goes into them. It's very much appreciated. And staff support, Caitlin, thank you for making it possible, Connie, and Matthew, who hangs in there somehow throughout these meetings, and our support from Prime Gov. Thank you, Sydney. And with that, we can close the meeting, adjourn.
And please thank the folks from PARS as well.
Yes, we will.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, good afternoon.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
All right. Is it dinner time?
Yeah, where's the pizza? Bye-bye now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Rosario.